What's missing in the tariff discussion is what other countries are doing. The reason we import so much is the cost of production in the U.S., as a general rule, is higher than the cost of production in a lot of other countries. It's cheaper to buy clothing from Vietnam than it is to buy clothing made in the U.S.
Yeah, but it also frees up our citizens to, one, have a higher standard of living, and two, buy other things. If I want to buy a new instrument for my kid at a local shop that produces, high quality trumpets, if I can go to Walmart and buy cheap clothes, I can buy like a custom made U.S. instrument at home. If all of a sudden we bring all our manufacturing back and now I have to buy, $50 for a pair of like children's like t-shirts or whatever because they're all made at home, I feel like there's an opportunity cost that's missing. It's almost like a broken Windows fallacy.
I actually agree with that.
Funnily enough, we talked earlier about how disastrous price controls are. What is one of the things that Donald Trump wants to take credit for is the price control on insulin. We talk about how bad government spending is. What is Donald Trump saying he wants to take credit for now? The ACA and pre-existing conditions, the thing that he tried to kill day one when he came into office.
Destiny, if you just want to start us off, you can give a brief intro if you want. I'm assuming most people know who you are, but kind of set the stage on the framework. If you had to framework why Kamala Harris when it comes to the economy and when it comes to taxes.
Yeah, so I think on a really macro perspective, I appreciate the Democrat view at the moment of the economy more than the Republican view of the economy. I feel like the Democrats have a bit more of a realistic understanding of how money works in an economy. And I feel like the Republicans have find a nicer word for delusional view of how money works. We can get as wide or as into the weeds as we want on that. On a wide view, it seems like Democrats understand that stimulating the demand side of things is incredibly important, that people need money, people need jobs, and that's as important as having suppliers that can produce goods and services for the economy. On the Republican side, I feel like we're still stuck in this weird supply side econ world where we feel like just giving infinite tax cuts and spending infinitely with no concern for the budget, while also saying we need to have zero debt, seems to be the MO. On a finer resolution, a lot of the tax proposals that Trump has made are just kind of bizarre to me, and I don't think they would even save that much money for people. Like when we talk about, what was one? He said that you'd be able to itemize your car loan interest. And it's I think at this point, it's after the increase of the standard deduction from the initial Trump tax cuts, it's 90% of Americans take the standard deduction. Yep. And even if you itemize, realistically, how much interest per year are you paying on a car? And now that's a tax, it's just this, we're saving pennies or dollars. Nobody that is qualifying for this deduction even cares about it. So yeah, I feel like on a very fine level, I feel like the proposals from Trump are very kind of bizarre and weird and nonsensical. And then on a macro level, I just don't know what the vision for the economy is of the Conservative Party at the moment. Yeah.
And then what would you say to Harris? What about her or what she's proposed or what Joe Biden's done for the last 3.5 years have you liked from a standpoint of what they're proposing?
It's a little bit hard to compare, unfortunately. Sorry, I'm going to come off as very politically biased, but it's hard to compare right now because I feel like there's only one party that really talks much about policy right now. So it's hard to compare, what could a world look like otherwise if policy debate was more what we did when it came to the economy. As far as saying good things, I think that we did do a good amount of stimulus for the economy. I know that people complain about inflation, but we were potentially facing, economic ruin. And I know that we are outperforming, the G7, I think the entire OECD when it comes to inflation in our economy. So despite how much of a problem people think inflation is, we're doing better than every other country. So I think the spending there was good. I think that allocating money for things like infrastructure, I'm glad that got passed. That's a political and economic thing. As far as trying to take care of citizens that might have children, so things like the child tax credit, expanding that, I think that those types of income redistribution programs are good for people. I feel like in general, I'm not a big fan of the answer to everything is just plug in more money. So I'm a little critical of the $15,000 first time homebuyer tax credit. Obviously that's going to be a big upward pressure on prices. I'm not a big fan of just money for everything, but I think things like the child tax credit and the expansion of that, I think these are worthwhile things. And I think investment in infrastructure and the American economy, I think is good too. So yeah.
We're definitely going to talk about the $25,000 proposed tax credit for new home. So all right, Tom, the same question to you when it comes to, and you can give a little bit of your philosophy. I'm assuming, Destiny, you're not familiar with Tom's book, Tax-Free Wealth, and any of his background. So Tom, feel free to give a little bit of paint that picture. But then also when it comes to economy, when it comes to you're working with value creators and business owners and all day long. And so just what's your perspective as it relates to that?
Well, first of all, the first thing to realize is the tax law has become, since John F. Kennedy, primarily a series of incentives, right? And so the tax law acts as incentives for certain activities. And I think, Destiny, you hit it right on the head, is that the Democrats have decided that the incentives need to fall heavily on the consumption side and the consumer side, whereas the Republicans have decided that the incentives need to fall heavily on the investment side. And that is a fact. In fact, that's the primary difference between the two tax proposals, is if you look at the Democratic side, they actually want to take down investment and take the money from investors through higher capital gains taxes, through higher corporate tax rates, through higher estate taxes, through eliminating 1031 exchanges. They want to take those dollars and give them to people who would consume those dollars, which I don't have an argument like with child tax credits. Are there some good parts of that? Absolutely. On the other hand, I believe that Harris's plan will put a lot of upward pressure on inflation. And I think inflation is the worst tax we have. It is the most regressive tax we have. It hits poor and middle class the most. And if you take $4 to $8 trillion from the investments and you put it into consumption, it's a little like feeding the economy sugar. And while, yes, it will stimulate in the short run, what will it do in the long run? And in the long run, what we saw from the 2020 and 2021, the big stimulus packages, the general public stimulus packages, is we saw this upward pressure, too much money chasing too few goods. And so you have to have this combination of, you've got to have the money in there, but you have to have the goods. And just this week, there was a report on the economy. You were right. You're right. We are outperforming other economies in the world. But what also was in that report is that only 20% of the GDP came from production. 80% came from consumption. And the question is, how long can you consume and not run out of supply, not put upward pressure on the price of goods? So, generally speaking, the Republicans are very heavy on the investment side. The Democrats are very heavy on the consumption side. That's not to say that there aren't some consumption sides of Trump's proposals, not taxing tips, not taxing overtime, which I don't like either of those proposals personally. And Harris has proposed increase in the low-income housing tax credit, which I think is a terrific proposal, and actually adding a neighborhood development tax credit, low-income housing tax credit, and those are investment type initiatives. But most of Harris's initiatives land in the consumer and the consumption area.
So this is pretty much the question I have as it relates to, like, okay, the liberal talking point versus maybe the conservative talking point comes down to, all right, should we give incentives to the consumer / worker, or to the corporations, to the people, the small business owners? And Destiny, how do you go about framing that question and thought process? Because obviously that's really like, it's like tax the rich. And again, sometimes I look at that as like, why are we taxing and trying to go after the people that are creating the jobs in the first place?
So I would say that if we look at like George W. Bush's economic policy, or if we go to like kind of neoconservatism and we look at their positions on like corporatism or immigration, we could have that conversation. But I don't agree right now that Republicans are trying to defend the supply side of the economy. One of the big concerns I think that people should have from a finance and economics point of view of the country right now is, it used to be that you would have conservatives fighting on the supply side and you would have Democrats fighting on the demand side, and then hopefully we would settle out out somewhere in the middle. But now we have just the Conservative Party, from a financial point of view, is wholly separated from reality. So I don't take very seriously the idea that the Conservative Party is concerned with the supply side when Donald Trump is talking about like a 20% across the board tariff, which would just be an unmitigated disaster when it comes to supply. Or when we look at supplies, like for instance, like supply of labor, right? Labor is one of your most important productive inputs for your economy. And Trump is talking about deporting anywhere from 12 to 20 million people. When we talk about things like consumption versus supplying, these are complicated affairs as well. So for instance, a lot of people are under the incorrect assumption, the intuitive one, that having a very strong currency is good, for instance, right? I want the dollar to be strong. Having a strong currency is very good when it comes to importing because I can buy a lot of stuff. Having strong currency is really rough when you're exporting because now our stuff is more expensive. And the USD has been gaining a lot of strength. Aren't we at like a 25-year high or something against the euro? So there are a lot of other things, other markets that are playing into our consumption versus our production, like our imports versus our exports. I mean, like that's kind of an international trade, I guess, is kind of another leg of this. But I guess to come back and center it, I don't feel like conservatives are very much the party of supply side help right now. They're stuck in this weird populist world where it feels like they're attacking everybody when Donald Trump's only policy is like this sledgehammer of massive tariffs for everything and then irrelevant tax deductions for like overtime and wages and car interest payments, I guess.
So I have a question for you, Destiny. So you don't see the 2017 Tax Act as a supply side tax proposal with all of the incentives, reducing the corporate tax rate from 35-21, which Kamala wants to increase to 28, reducing the tax on entrepreneurs by 20%. So
I guess I'm kind of curious because I don't know how this. I guess I haven't like done research on this or whatever. But wouldn't if you cut the corporate tax rate, wouldn't that lead to a decrease in supply side production?
No, it always results in an increase because you have corporations aren't people, right? Corporations now have more money to reinvest into supply. Basically, reinvest into equipment, reinvest into innovation. That's where they have more money if they don't have such a high tax rate.
Well, isn't that not really true though? Like if I'm let's say that I own a business, right? And I'm looking for projects with a high NPV plus, right? I'm looking for a net present value plus project to invest in. Let's say that we live in a world hypothetically where the corporate tax rate is 99%, okay? That means that if I have $1,000 in profit for my business, if I can invest in any project that just doesn't lose me 99% of my money, I'm basically like making money, right? Because the profit tax is so high that I'm encouraged to basically invest my money reinvest in my business no matter what. Whereas if the corporate tax rate comes down to 1%, well, that NPV plus project has to be pretty lucrative now because I can have absolutely no corporate taxes. I just have to pay my personal income tax on whatever gets withdrawn from my company. So I feel like, I don't know if I agree, unless there's like some a plug in there that I'm missing, that like a high corporate tax rate, because it would only apply to profits, not revenues, right? So why would that necessarily discourage reinvestment? If anything, I feel like it would encourage reinvestment because you'd be trying to avoid the tax rate there.
Why would you reinvest? Why would you even undertake a business if there's no possibility of profits? Because the government takes everything.
You don't get taxed.
Why would you do something? Why would an entrepreneur entrepreneurs take all the risk, they put all the money, they put in all of their sweat, blood, and tears. Why would they do that? If the government were going to take all the money, I mean, would you do it? I wouldn't do it.
Well, not take all the money, but I mean, like.
Well, 99% is all the money.
Well, sure.
There's nothing left over.
I'm obviously 99% would be an extreme hyperbolic example, but I'm saying like if the corporate tax rate were 20%, I would still be incentivized to make money from a business because it's better than just being employed, right? But if the corporate tax rate is 20%, when I'm going to invest in future projects, I'm accounting for that corporate tax rate, right? I'm probably trying to avoid stuff in the profit margin as much as possible, and I'm probably trying to reinvest or expense out most of that money. So wouldn't like a slightly higher tax rate to some extent encourage reinvestment versus having a 0% tax rate?
No, that's the opposite, because tax by definition is a drag. In the dictionary, just tax something is to put a drag or a weight on it.
Yeah, but what are we taxing?
Well, you're taxing corporate profits. So by doing that, you're putting a drag on the amount of money that they have to reinvest. Remember, if you, and again,
well, wait,
there's one
but
other
if,
thing.
if you reinvest the
There's one
money,
other
it's not a
question you have
profit,
to
right?
address is, how do you define corporate profits? Okay, so that's actually a very big question. Okay, so for example, the Republicans want to bring back full expensing of equipment. Okay, that means that if you spend $1 on equipment, you don't have to pay tax on that dollar you spent. But if you didn't have that, if you had a long-term depreciation rate, say 10 years, then you'd actually spend $100 and you'd only get to deduct 10. Okay, and you get to deduct 10 a year. But what that does is it actually reduces the incentive. Now, the Democrats,
hold on, wait.
with John F. Kennedy, John F. Kennedy actually was the first one to incentivize investment in equipment. He enacted the 10% investment tax credit for that same reason.
Wait, depreciation schedules can be important. I might not want to take a full deduction up front for a particular thing. I might want to depreciate that on a schedule over some number of years.
Why? Why would you want to do that? Why would you want your money later instead of today?
Well, because if they're...
Under what math does that work?
I mean, I guess it depends on the type of business we're talking about, right? If we say, for instance, if we're talking,
doesn't.
What?
No,
Well,
it doesn't because here's the thing. So the more money I have, the more money I can invest. Okay, investment, and in fact, all production is a matter of mass. Okay, how much mass do I have to invest? That's why the rich get richer, because they have more mass. Okay, and that is actually the argument against not taxing the rich more, frankly. Okay, but if you have more money, you can invest more. The faster you have the money, the faster you have the money, the more money you have to invest, and every year you have more money to invest.
Yeah, but hold on, the tax
for it. If you wait for it, then you don't have the money.
So, okay, let's say theoretically, let's say that I have if I say that I've got like a pass-through or flow-through entity, right? You understand that the entity itself isn't taxed, but it flows through to my taxes, right? So if I am working with an LLC and I've got some kind of pass-through entity, let's say that I purchase something, and let's say that I purchase an asset for $1 million, right? My goal in depreciating that on a schedule would be, I don't want to take a massive depreciation for this year and pay no tax and then not carry that forward to the future years, because on a progressive tax system, if I can knock dollars out of that top tax bracket every single year, that's more valuable than just doing, in some cases, than just doing an upfront full depreciation like instantaneously, right?
Well, I love it when I hear other people talk about tax planning. That's awesome, because that's what I do for a living. But in principle, okay, you're right. Are there times when you're going to manage your tax deductions? Absolutely. But the general rule is, I want my money now, because I can invest that money. Because not only can I invest that money now, I can actually leverage that money with the bank's money or investors' money, and I can actually get an even higher rate of return. And so what it does is it increases the velocity of my money, and I get a higher and higher rate of return.
So I understand what you're saying I understand what you're saying in kind of a simple sense, in that, like, I want my money now so that I can leverage it. But if we're talking about like corporate business stuff, or if we're getting into higher dollar amounts, you don't need money to leverage it. You just need an asset, or you need future cash flows, right? So if I can do certain types of tax strategizing where I am optimizing for future cash flows, and one of the ways to do that would be to minimize my overall tax footprint over a large period of time, rather than just taking a whole huge upfront deduction, right? Why would I ever want to tax deduct stuff that's in like the bottom income bracket, right? I have no desire to do that, right? But there's ways for me to gain access to other people's capital and investments that just revolve around like the valuation of my company, future potential cash flows, other assets that I might have that don't need me to just have a bunch of cash right now, right? That's like the lowest level of like investment or leveraging, right? Is I have cash and like let me leverage it, right?
Well, so let's go back to the corporate tax rate. Corporate tax rate's a flat tax rate. It's not a graduated rate. There's no graduated rate in the corporate tax rate. And so when you propose increasing that rate or decreasing the amount of deductions, you are putting a drag on the investments that are possible in corporations. Now remember, yes, you're talking about pass-throughs, and that's an individual graduated tax rate. Mm-hmm. And there are points where, in fact, it's the 20% point typically, where if you get below 20%, you probably are good, right? 20% is a good tax rate to be paying. If I pay less than that, then I may be giving up future tax benefit, maybe. Okay.
Sure.
However, in the corporate world, that's not the case. And remember, all small businesses, they have the right to use the corporate rate. They don't have to use the pass-through rate. Everybody can use the corporate rate, not just the big businesses. So my point is that, look, if you have a flat rate, then absolutely you want your money now. You absolutely do not want to wait. Okay. If you have a graduated rate, there are rare circumstances. And I can tell you, I've been doing this for 45 years. It's rare that I see somebody who doesn't want to take the deduction now and wants to postpone it. Because you're also assuming that I'm going to put all my money back into investment, when the reality is I'm going to take some of that money out because I need to live on it if I'm an entrepreneur. And that money's going to be taxed. And I'm going to get my 20% tax rate just on the money that I need to take out to live on.
Sure.
I don't want to have to pay. I don't want to have to pay taxes.
Can I ask a question on that? Because I don't know, because I don't have a C corp for my my corporation is structured like a C corporation. When you say you have to take out money now in order to live off of it, if you the money that you would take from a C corp, wouldn't you W-2 yourself and just pay that out as an expense to the business? Would the corporate tax rate be applied to money that you pay yourself in W-2?
So in a C corp, you're right. You would take it out. Probably, if you could, you take it out as salary, because if you take it as a dividend, our current tax system doesn't allow a deduction for dividends, which is, by the way, a horrible idea. We should be allowing a deduction for dividends.
Sure. So you shouldn't be living off of your business profits. Ideally, you pay yourself a wage if you're part of a business, right?
But an entrepreneur who has a flow-through tax is living off their business profits. They're not taking everything out in salary. They are living off their business profits.
Sure, but if it's a flow-through, then you're not, corporate taxes don't apply anyway, right? LLCs, S corporations.
Right.
But let me get back to the individual tax rate. So if you're assuming, so we go, upwards to a 40% tax rate, right? Well, the 20% tax rate applies to the amount of money that you would take out to live on. It doesn't apply to the money you would leave in. The money you're leaving in is at the higher tax rate. So what I'm suggesting is that's a drag. And I'd rather see the expensing. I'll give you a perfect example. In 2017, the Trump tax bill did something that very few people actually even know to this day exists. And it allows small businesses to deduct their inventory currently. Okay? In other words, they don't have to wait until they sell it. Well, why is that a big deal? Because small businesses that are growing were actually going out of business because of taxes, because they put their money back in inventory. It's not deductible. They don't have the cash, but they have to pay the tax. Okay, so they're reinvesting in inventory to grow their business, but that inventory wasn't deductible. Now it's deductible. Now they can actually have the money to reinvest in the inventory. But if they have to use the money to pay taxes, they don't have the money to reinvest.
What, can you just help me? Because I'm just trying to understand. If I'm growing inventory for my business, am I paying taxes on the money that I'm spending to increase the size of my inventory?
Yes, you are. Unless you meet this exception that Trump put into effect in 2017. Yes, you are.
Okay.
So take a big corporation, take Apple, for example. Is Apple paying tax on the money they put back in inventory? Absolutely.
And when we say inventory here, we're talking about like purchases from like other manufacturers and stuff, I'm guessing? Or
well, we're talking about everything that you have in stock. So that could anywhere from parts to finished goods, anything that you have in stock. That's inventory.
I think here's a question. Destiny, are you familiar with how the QBI tax credit works for pass-through entities?
Can you explain it to me? What does it stand for?
Yeah, Tom, why don't you explain? And then the question is,
that's the qualified business income deduction. So as part of the 2017 Act, in order to basically compensate smaller businesses who don't have a corporate tax rate, just like you're talking about, Destiny, they put into place a 20% deduction off the top. Okay, so in other words, a business only pays 80% on its income, where an individual pays tax on 100% of their income. But a business only pays tax on 80% of their income. It effectively lowered the top rate from 37% to 29.6%. That's what it did. Okay, for business income. That's the point of that. And so the idea of that is, let's get to a lower rate right off the bat, closer to a corporate rate, but still it's still basically a 9% difference.
Are you, Destiny, are you in favor? Because if nothing happens, it's going to sunset, and pretty much
goes away.
If Kamala Harris gets in it's probably not going to be renewed. If Trump gets in, he's already said that he wants to renew everything that he, with the Tax and Jobs Cuts Act. So what is your thoughts around that? Because almost every small business owner that we serve takes advantage of that. And whether it's true or not, they're under the belief that they're better off, like they have more money.
It's a big deal for a small business.
It's a big deal. And the reason it was put in is so that the little guy, the pass-through businesses like all of ours, got the same sort of benefit that corporations got.
I guess I would have to be more informed in terms of how this QBI works, or like what it actually applies to. I
guess here's maybe a different question. It's less specific. Are you in favor of lower taxes for pass-through businesses, even that make more than $400,000 in net profit? Or like, what do you believe, like what tax rate should that be? Because I guess that I would just love to hear your thoughts around taxation when it comes to, people in business.
Business income.
Sure.
That's a good question.
I mean, on the most macro level, I think that the tax rate for a society should be such that you can ideally afford the majority of your budget every year, right? So we've got some level of programs that we want to fund, and we fund that through taxation. Whether that taxation comes more from businesses versus individuals, to be 100% honest, I don't think I've ever even been sold on the concept of a corporate tax. I don't know if it's something that is like more productive than just taxing income, just period. I'm not entirely sure on that. So, but I don't know enough. Like, I don't know what like the Laffer curve theoretical appointment should be for the corporate tax rate to optimize your cash flows from tax receipts from corporations. I'm just not sure. And then you've got like huge corporations that are very investment heavy and growing a ton. They just end up paying no corporate tax anyways because all of their money goes back into reinvestment. So there are no profits to tax. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have like strong opinions one way or the other about corporate taxes. I would have to see like paperwork to really believe that like a lot of these tax breaks are helping small businesses. I just don't believe it that much. I feel like people just want to take on more money because at the end of the day, like I've never hired or fired or thought about any part of my business because of the tax rates. If anything, higher taxes seem to spur on that investment a little bit more because I know that if I reinvest it's just revenue and then I can expense it out instead of paying taxes on it. But there might be some types of businesses, like I don't hold inventory, I don't sell products like that. There might be like paperwork that I could see where it's like, oh, I can see how this like tax break would help significantly here. But at the end of the day, it comes down to what programs do you want to fund and then what's the best way to raise the money for it. Yeah.
But what's your opinion? Because is it a bad thing that people get wealthy in America?
Is it a bad? No, I don't think so at all. No. I think America is amazing for that.
So can I ask you a question, Destiny? So I have two questions. First of all, are you familiar with the global minimum tax that they proposed in the OECD?
Yeah, I think GMT, the idea, I'm familiar conceptually at a very high level with it, but I couldn't get into the weeds about it. I think that the idea is that you want to equalize some global tax rate around the world so there's not like these tax haven like incentives like in Ireland.
Well,
right?
it actually would operate to make sure that American companies don't get all of those tax benefits and pay a minimum 15% tax rate. Okay, so they would pay tax and it actually go into, I honestly can't even tell you where it goes because, but it goes to other countries. It doesn't go to the U.S., okay? They would pay this minimum tax rate so they would not effectively get all of those tax benefits, including all of the write-offs of their equipment. So I was just curious if you had any thoughts on that.
I think I don't like the idea of countries making a lot of money off of tax rates. So I'm not necessarily opposed to like some kind of global minimum tax if it means that there aren't countries that are just making a ton of money because they happen to have favorable rates. I think it's a little silly to, have an office in Delaware and to say that this is like where your business is somehow, earning money through or the Irish tax stuff. Like, I think that's kind of silly. So I'm not opposed to global corporate or global like minimums or whatever, or some way to prevent like financial exits from countries for that. But like maybe that could be done in other ways too, that make it, you like penalize people that do business out of the country and try to like bring the money back or something. I don't know. Maybe a GMT isn't the best way to do it.
Or incentivize people to bring money in the country like they did in the 2017 Act. They brought $2 trillion back into the country.
Sure, I think there are good ways to incentivize ways to bring things, but you agree, right? There are bad ways to incentivize money coming back to a country, right?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure. And we're never going to get rid of tax havens. It's not possible to get rid of tax havens as long as we have high taxes. One thing that's been interesting is since 2017, the global tax rate has come down across the board. And so it's been a bit of a race to the bottom, which is not necessarily a bad thing because that helps the entire world's economy, not just the U.S. economy. So that was one thing. But I wanted to go back to Caleb's question, which is Harris and Biden have proposed significant tax increases on investors. Okay, start with the capital gains tax, an increase to 33%, 28% rate plus a 5% net investment income tax, which is just basically a 33% tax rate, okay, which is a 60% tax increase from the capital gains rate, which, and then also proposed other tax increases on capital assets, like the unrealized capital gains tax, like, the corporate income tax actually is an investment tax that way, because it means that your stock portfolio probably loses value if the corporation's paying more money to taxes as opposed to having more money available for reinvestment or doing or paying out. That's it. I get your shrug there. And
the only reason I shrug, like, I agree with you, like in the micro, but obviously in the macro, right? The argument would be that they might be losing a little bit of value out of their portfolio because of the taxes that are being directly paid, but then they might be gaining value in their portfolio because more consumers have money to buy products from the company, right? It's like a back and forth, ideally, right?
Okay. All right. I get where you're going there.
Yeah.
So I am curious, though, about your thoughts on particularly increasing taxes on investment income, like capital gains taxes, like taxing gifts as capital gains, taxing estates for capital gains and estate tax, eliminating 1031 exchanges, which are the like-kind exchanges on real estate, so you don't have to pay tax when you sell real estate as long as you buy more real estate. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Depreciation goes away altogether after, or 100% depreciation.
No, the bonus depreciation does. We go back to what we've had for basically 40 years.
Yeah, so I think the question is.
But I'm most interested in the increase in the rates.
Yeah.
The capital gains rates. I mean, for example, let me give you an example. So let's say that you're a business owner, and you put all your money in your business. This is your retirement. You don't have 401k because you're putting your money back in your business. This is basically your retirement. And when you retire, you sell that, and now you have a 33% tax rate because you're going to recognize all that in 1 year. You don't get to take it over a number of years. Like if an employee puts their money into a 401k, they're going to pull that out and be taxed on it. In those lower marginal rates that you talked about earlier, they're going to be taxed on that as they pull it out. Whereas the business owner, because now, okay, so let's say it's $1 million, which is what Harris has proposed, but you sell your business for $3 million, that $2 million is going to be subject to that 33% tax, which is quite a bit higher than if they'd been able to take it over their retirement years like an employee does. So I am curious as to how what you think about those increases in capital gains rates.
I guess at the end of the day, like I said, it all comes down to like managing government spending with government income. And if this is one of the ways that they can make more money by taxing capital gains a bit more, then I mean, like we said earlier, right? In terms of the Laffer curve, right? There's going to be some level of taxation that discourages heavily any future investment. There's going to be some level of taxation that too low discourages future cash flows to the government, right? Like if we had a 5% capital gains tax, you could probably raise it to 6% and people would invest just as much, right? You could probably raise it to 7%, people would invest a lot. Would a 28%, would a 5-point gain, a 5-point increase on the capital gains tax discourage investment? I guess the question is...
It's a 10-point gain, not a 5-point gain.
10-point? Okay. What would be the, I guess, like what else would the money go into? I'm not sure. I don't know.
So here's statistically, historically, because I've looked at these numbers, 28% is the maximum capital gains rate you can have before you're significantly discouraging investment. But if you think right now, most people have a 28% capital gains rate because they have a 23.8% federal rate and they have a 4 to 5% state rate. So they're already at that peak. So if you look at, for example, Tax Foundation runs lots of numbers on this, and what they show is that you get over that level, just like you're suggesting, you get over that level, you actually bring less money into the government. So one of my points is, it seems like, and maybe I'm misreading this, but it seems like there is this need for the Democrats to raise taxes on the rich for the sake of looking like they're raising taxes on the rich, whether or not it actually increases the revenue to the government.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess the question could be, if taxes are going up on the capital gains rate, like if they are bumped 5 or 10 points, what is the alternative? What's that money being spent on anyway? Like, what would people invest in instead?
You mean, what would they do with that? Well, they're going to give that money to the government. What do you mean?
They'd be spending that money.
What?
It's the same. It's the same concept of giving deductions.
The argument is
that a higher tax rate, a higher capital gains tax is going to discourage investment. But if the money is not being invested, what would they do with the money otherwise?
Well, so they're not going to have them. So what you're saying is well, here's what's going to happen. You're not going to sell the asset. So what you do is you take liquidity out of the marketplace, because if I'm going to be taxed when I sell it, and of course, this is why Harris wants this unrealized capital gains tax, right? This is actually the reason she wants that capital gains tax, is because by increasing the capital gains tax rate from an effective 24% to a 33% rate, okay, which is the proposal, then what you're doing is you're saying, well, look, maybe I should just hold on to it, and I won't sell it, and I won't have transactions, which takes liquidity out of the marketplace, which actually depresses the marketplace because you don't have buyers and sellers.
Sure. So I definitely agree with you there, and I think that's a huge problem. But I don't agree that that's a problem with increasing a theoretical tax rate. I think that's just a lock-in problem from taxing at the point of sale. And I feel like in an odd way, taxing unrealized gains would probably increase liquidity in markets, because there's no longer as much of a lock-in function if you're being forced to step up the tax basis year after year because, well, now fuck it, like I've already paid taxes on this investment, even though I haven't sold it, I might as well. If it, like right now, right, if we're looking for investment opportunities, let's say that I have $1 million sitting in some taxable asset and my tax basis in that is 50 grand, right? Well, when I go to invest in any other opportunity, I have to imagine that I'm about to suck $950,000 of appreciation out, and I'm gonna have to pay, I don't care if it's 28%, 38%, whatever, I'm about to lose a quarter of my money. So I'm locked in like crazy. But if I have to pay a step up in basis every year or whatever, however you would do that to increase that, then the lock-in effect disappears. But I don't know if like 33 or 35% is significantly more lock-in than 25%. I don't know if I'm fully convinced on that. I think that lock-in is a problem, but I think that has more to do with how we treat the tax basis of investments.
I mean, you know, when they run the numbers, it actually is. You know, when they run all the models, it is significant. But you do, of course, now open the door to the unrealized capital gains tax, which, Caleb, I know you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, this was the point I wanted to get to, so I'm glad Destiny brought it up. Yeah. And I think he just opened it up, like unrealized capital gains. Destiny kind of made the point
So let's talk about this. First of all, it's very, I'm going to say, this is one of the worst proposals out there. It is. It's really, you know, I know you hate the tariffs. I hate the unrealized capital gains tax, and I hate it for a number of reasons. One is that you are taking an enormous amount. Remember, when you take money out of the investment class and you put it into the consumption, then what you're doing is that you are you're reducing the amount that's being invested long term, and you're putting it into short-term consumption, which, yes, it's like a sugar high. Okay, so that's what goes on. The worst part of the unrealized capital gains tax, though, is it is completely unmanageable, and it's such a disincentive to do anything. It's a complete disincentive.
Yeah, well, hold on. We need to, when we talk about incentives, we have to compare these things to other things, right? Let's say that I live in an environment where, I am taxed at 5% if I invest in a particular thing, okay, that appreciates at 100% per year. And let's say that all of the other investment opportunities around me appreciate at 2% per year. it doesn't matter if you triple or quadruple my tax. My overall gains, my index is going to be way higher investing in that ultra profitable opportunity rather than investing in less taxed other things. So when we talk about how the tax will increase and it'll disincentivize one thing, what we should be talking about, what else is the money going towards? This is what I was saying earlier when I'm saying, like, let's say that I have $1 million invested and the capital gains tax goes up, or let's say I have $1 million to invest and the capital gains tax goes up. It's not like I'm just not investing my money. It's not like all of a sudden it's a good idea to keep my money in the bank. Yeah, my tax rate might go up on my appreciated asset, but I'm still making money, right? As opposed to just sitting there losing money to inflation or whatever, or I guess like hoarding treasury bonds. So there has to be some other place where the money is going if we're disincentivizing things, because at the end of the day, tax rates and profits and all of these things are just competing for what is your good investment opportunity, and all of these things are factors in that, I think. Yeah.
But you're presuming that there's just as much money to invest, when in fact, when you're taxing it, there isn't as much money to invest. And so now what I have to do is I have to spend a higher proportion of my money on consumption than I do in investment. And there's not that investment going back into the economy. There's not that investment going back into production. I mean,
wait, how is there not?
Look at the top 4 or 5 incentives in the U.S. tax code right now. There's 4 or 5 of them, okay? The first one's business. You mentioned it several times. If I put my money back into my business, I don't have to pay tax on that money, okay? The second would be technology, which Trump wants to bring back the research and development deduction, which is a huge need, by the way, in our country. The fact that it went away is a really horrible disadvantage us versus the rest of the world that has much better tax incentives for research and development. But then go to real estate, okay? Look at how much housing has been built since 2017, in large part because of the additional incentives to invest in real estate through the bonus depreciation. And then you look at energy. What did Biden do in 2022? The big bill was the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, what was the main part of that? Well, that was in energy, renewable energy incentives. Those are tax incentives, credits and deductions. And then and then you've got fossil fuel tax incentives, and then you have agricultural incentives, which are probably the biggest incentives that there are in the tax law, are agricultural tax incentives. Because here's what the government wants. They want us to produce housing, they want us to produce food, they want us to produce energy, and they want us to produce jobs. And so that's where those incentives go, okay? But if you take the money out of those incentives, you have less money going in. And again, it's this mass problem. It's like compound interest works really well the 5th, 6th, 7th time you compound it, but it works terrible the first time you compound it.
Why do we? You keep saying we're taking money out. Can you explain?
Right,
what you mean?
You're taking the money from the investors and you're putting it into consumers.
Wait, because do the consumers set it on fire? Where does the money go next?
So you're assuming it's going right back to the rich people.
But yeah, if a poor person gets money from the government via taxation and then they spend that money, they're probably spending it in places that are like heavily capitalized by capital owners, right?
Well, yes, but that's like saying, okay, a sugar calorie is just as valuable as a protein calorie or a vegetable calorie. They have different values, okay? And this is your argument, I presume, is that you can't just rely on supply side, which I agree. You've got to have consumption, but what's that proportion? That's my question. What's the proportion of investment versus consumption? If it's all consumption, here's what happens. The biggest problem is inflation. Because what happens is that, remember, the people who are investing, they have extra money. Okay, so and that's the argument for taxing them, because they have extra money, so they can afford to do it. They can. Okay, that's a fact. They can afford to do it. The challenge is that you're taking that money. It's like selling your gold supplies. Okay, you're taking that money, and now what you're doing is you're consuming it, which means that you're pushing up heavy on the demand side, but you're not increasing the supply side because you're taking money out of the supply side. So at the same time you're taking money out of the supply side, you're adding to the demand side, which is natural inflationary pressure.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it's a balance, right? We have to talk about both ends,
Well,
right? Because we can also
Right. It is a balance.
you want some. Well, hold on, wait. We all remember the graph, right? Our quantity produced, quantity supplied, right? Not all of those pressures are necessarily bad, right? Having people that are willing to pay more for certain goods or services can increase on the supply side the willingness to produce a given good or service, right? At a quantity demanded, more will be produced at a higher price paid. So the idea, I feel like it's just when you talk about like when you remove money from one area and give it into another, you're talking about all the potential negatives, which are true, right? Removing money from investment can be bad. We want to capitalize our businesses. Giving an infinite amount of money to create upward pressure on demand could be bad. You're increasing inflation. You're making things less affordable. But every single economic transaction has another side to it, right? If you've got some guy who has $1 billion invested in his company and his tax basis for this is like $1 million, one, whatever the tax rate is, we haven't realized any of it from the government, right? And two, who's to say that the money is better off not even being taxed versus you tax the money from him, you pour it into people that are going to consume. When people go to Walmart and they buy goods and services, I mean, where does the money ultimately end back up in, right? And the suppliers that are now going to be expanding stores, hiring more workers, not to mention the social goods from giving people money so they can consume things and increase their standards of living and everything else. And yeah, so I understand what you're saying. Obviously, again, I said Laffer curve like 50 times, right? There's going to be an ideal level of taxation that we have to talk about, but we can't just pretend that all of these transactions are just bad on one side and good on the other, right?
I totally agree. My question for you then is, what I'm hearing from you, tell me I'm wrong. But what I'm hearing from you is you think it's imbalanced right now, and that we need to rebalance it by actually increasing the demand side and decreasing the supply side. That's what I'm hearing.
I don't know if that's
right?
I mean, I'm not going to. I can't seriously debate like macroecon. It's going to be difficult for me, right? But I mean, my understanding is as long as the inflation is around 2%. We can stimulate the demand side a bit more, as long as unemployment is below 5.5%, right? I mean, like the Federal Reserve has its two targets, and that's kind of how it conducts monetary policy. And as long as our stuff is staying there, then pumping the supply side and the demand side is good. But we look at our government budget next to say, okay, well, what's going on? If we're overspending like crazy, which everybody seems to do, Trump included, well, then maybe we need to tax a little bit more, right?
Or spend a little less.
Yeah, because again, like even something you said. Even something you said earlier, you mentioned something about how when tax rates are lower, like the growth is higher. Well, that's a bit of that's a sneaky statement. I'm not saying you're intentionally saying something wrong, but like when people said, for instance, that the Trump tax cuts spurred on the economy, that's true, of course. It's deficit spending. You would expect it to. Trump cut a whole bunch of tax receipts from the government, but continued to spend. But it's not fair that Trump gets to take credit for what's essentially deficit spending and say, well, the reason why is because we gave suppliers more money. You did, but you did it by not only allowing them to keep more money, but in a roundabout way, you're stimulating the demand side as well by continuing to spend at an exorbitant rate for the government as well, right? There's always like two sides to all of these transactions that everybody seems to ignore. Trump was just as much a demand side stimulator as any supply side alleviator because he deficit spent at record levels even before COVID.
Well, before COVID, his deficits were not nearly as big as they are right now under Biden.
That's true. Coming at it, but Biden has an excuse, right?
Biden has an excuse. What's his excuse? His excuse is, here's the problem. And I want to get just to this. And I really appreciate you bringing this up. His excuse is we have inflation. Okay, so because we have inflation, we have higher interest rates, and it's the higher interest rates that are causing that deficit to be so high. And the higher interest rates do, in fact, have a huge impact on the deficit. Okay, but where do the higher deficits come from? They come from the higher spending of the 2021, the March 2021 American Rescue Plan and the Trump 2020. Okay, both of those. Neither one of those, my opinion, just in my opinion, were necessary to stimulate the economy. Both of them pushed demand side up without taking into account that we had this huge supply side disruption caused by COVID.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Well, there's just two quick facts on that. So one, you can say that they weren't necessary. I don't know if what we're competing against is a legendary, hypothetical, mystical version of America. We are outperforming every other country when it comes to inflation. So if we say that we could have done even better, that's fine. But you're talking about going from rank 1 to rank like super 1. Like the reality is whatever financial stimulus we did, which was higher than every other country in the world except I think Japan, it clearly helped us to some extent because we are buoying off like inflation better than every other country. Number one. Number two, Donald Trump's pre-COVID deficits were still larger than Biden's current deficits, even with COVID. Trump had no excuse to run deficits at that level prior to COVID. His economy was booming. Everybody involved in the markets and watching the GDP knew this. Why, if Trump was going to spend that crazy with no crisis, who's to say he wouldn't spend even more insane now, still after COVID, with inflation being high, or the year over year at least, the cumulative being high?
So prior to COVID, his deficits were lower than Biden's.
His spending,
his deficits were lower.
My understanding is
I'm
that
not saying his spending were, but his deficits were lower.
His spending at that point was the highest it had been in U.S. history for deficits, right? Before COVID, right?
It was higher, but Biden has far surpassed him.
Sure, but again, because
we're at $2 trillion this year.
Do what?
We're at $2 trillion for the first time this year in an annual deficit.
Sure, but again, it's in a post-COVID environment, right? So there's
right, but we're 2 years post-COVID. We're not 6 months post-COVID. We're 2 years post-COVID. And my point is, so here's what I want to get back to, if I can, Destiny. I appreciate your thoughts. Mm-hmm. Is that if you have this, you're putting all this money in, and you're going to get inflation. Because what I heard is that some inflation may be fine. It may be fine if you get inflation. The Federal Reserve, they have been very clear that their job is not to deal with spending. It's not the demand side from a spending standpoint. In other words, that's the government's job.
Sure.
Their job is to, their job is two things only. One is interest rates, the interest rates and employment. So
sure. Oh, to be clear, just so everybody knows, when you say spending, you're talking about the government spending, right?
Yeah, government spending.
Yep.
Right. So inflation and inflation, they want to bring inflation down, and they want to balance that with employment. Right. That's their two mandates, according to them. Okay, so what happens if you get this upward pressure on inflation that we're talking about now? What happens is that now you get higher interest rates. What happens with higher interest rates? Now, you're going to get severe disruption in the economy. I think we're lucky, frankly. I think we're lucky that we have not had a bigger downturn in the economy than we have. I don't think this was the Fed being smart as much as it was. I think we got a little lucky.
Well, hold on, wait. I'm sorry. Again, isn't this a two-sided thing? No, like higher interest rates can also cool off an economy and cool off inflation as well. No.
Well, that is what they did. Okay, it does. That's what they did. That's why we've had higher interest rates than we've had in 40 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these high interest rates. What they do is, yes, they cool down. But remember, they also cool down investment. So they've had a huge impact on the supply of housing. Huge impact. The housing is not being built. Why is that? Well, because the interest rates are so high. And why are the interest rates so high? It's not that 5% is a bad interest rate. I mean, I grew up, when I bought my first house, it was 16%. That was bad. Okay, so historically 5% is an average rate. What's bad is when you go from 2% to 7% in a year and a half. That's what's bad, because you put such a jolt to the economy that you have an enormous risk. I think we got lucky. But you put that enormous risk to the economy. And so inflation pressure, and the other thing is yes, inflation's come down, but prices haven't come down from where they were 2 years ago.
Sure, but prices
just aren't going up as fast.
Well,
the average person
is
to be clear, feeling the inflation.
Yeah, there's still inflation will be cumulative. The rate, it's never going to deflate, right?
Right. It's not going to deflate.
Sure. And then also just to revisit, okay, so according to the for the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget, for the debt that these two presidents accumulated, Donald Trump's non-COVID spending was $4.8 trillion. The CARES Act and then COVID relief that he provided was $3.6 trillion. Biden's, the American Rescue Plan, was $2.1 trillion. His non-COVID debt was 2.2 trillion. Trump spent like crazy.
No, that 2.2 trillion. The deficit this year is 2 trillion. 1 year.
This was something released by the Trump and Biden on the national debt. This came out June 24th, U.S. Budget Watch, 2024, I guess. But
I can't speak to it because if you look at what the deficit is through September for the fiscal year ending September is right around $2 trillion. So I'm not sure how they come up with 2.2 over 4 years, non-COVID.
Well, and I appreciate this dialogue.
I just don't know the answer.
What is your guys' thoughts on the national debt? Because it seems like both parties aren't talking about it, or they're kind of talking about it, but no one's really taking it seriously.
Well, this is one place where I think Destiny and I are going to agree.
Well, I'm just, it's just one of those things that no one's talking about.
I honestly think I am scared for my grandchildren because of the national debt. So there's only two ways.
So what's the solution? Because it's raise more money, which
it's probably a combination. Honestly, it's a combination of raising more money and spending less. It's both. You have to do both. You can't do just one. You can't just reduce spending. You can't just increase taxes. It won't work. You've got to do some combination of them. And I'm not. You'll be shocked at this, Caleb. I'm not opposed to, let's say, a surtax on somebody making over $5 million. They're not going to miss it. It's not. I don't think that 5%. So
you want to explain what that is?
Hillary Clinton. So Hillary Clinton proposed a surtax on people making over $10 million. I think it was a 4 or 5% surtax. I have no issue with that. I actually think that's fine. There's a revenue raiser right there. Okay, it's just another tax rate. It's a surtax. Okay, it's not a tax on investment. It's just a tax on income. So it doesn't single out investment, which is the important thing. And it didn't apply to capital gains. It only applied to ordinary income. So I don't have an issue. I have no question. We need to raise some revenue, but we also need to reduce expenses. One of our challenges, of course, and this is a question I have for you, Destiny, is: are you concerned? Because you seem to be concerned about the national debt, like I am. Do I have that right? First of all, are you concerned about the national debt?
I'm not concerned about the conversation about the national debt because I feel like the conversations around it are just really bad. The issue is that, if you ask somebody, what is or I guess I could ask you, how much debt should the United States have?
I have no idea.
Okay. That's a better answer. That's good. Okay. Because a lot of people will say zero, which is not true, right? You always want to be
that's not true. And if you look at Japan, they're at 200% of GDP. They're not failing.
Sure. Yeah. So I don't know what the ideal debt should be. It should probably be some percentage of GDP. I do think we are spending a lot, and we've added a lot recently. But I guess the thing that's confusing to me that I don't understand about conservatives is if we talk about the debt and they talk about their concerns for the debt, like you said, you either have to raise more money or spend less money. And, people can sit here and talk about the budget, but a lot of people, when they talk about the budget, they're only talking about the discretionary spending, which is like 30% of the federal budget?
Very small percentage.
Yeah, we're not even talking about non-discretionary. What, are you going to have Republicans cutting, like Social Security? Yeah, that's not happening. So I guess the confusing thing is, for being so concerned about the debt, it feels like Donald Trump has a platform that would apply an unfathomable amount of upward pressure on things related to inflation. So global tariffs, these are massively inflationary, destructive to consumption and supply chains. You've got mass deportation of labor here, right? You're going to drive up prices, right? You're going to drive up the cost of labor to untenable amounts potentially, right? Which is going to be inflationary. He's talking about pressuring the Fed. He admitted to trying to pressure Powell, right, into keeping interest rates low in his own term. And he says he wants to keep interest rates low when he comes back. He wants to eliminate all these random income taxes, reducing tax receipts. He wants to maintain his prior tax cuts, right? Reducing tax receipts. I don't know where these spending cuts are supposed to come from. He doesn't talk about them ever, and he talks about all these income-reducing cuts, and we have to service interest on the debt. So I just don't know how anybody could ever look at Donald Trump, a guy who spent like crazy when the economy was good, and think that this is the guy that I'm going to choose for fighting the debt and fighting the deficit. Yeah.
So let's going back to the deficit. I agree. I mean, we don't have I don't know what the magic number is. Frankly, I don't think anybody knows what that magic number is. I don't think the smartest economist in the world knows what that magic number is because we've never been here before. This is new territory because it's a worldwide economy. It's not a U.S. economy only. It's a worldwide economy. So you can't say, well, it's like, the Byzantine area or whatever, because that was a country, not a global. My question for you, Destiny, though, is let's go back to something you brought up at the very beginning, which was the child tax credits, which socially we go, okay, we're all empathetic for that, okay? Especially the child care credit. I'm actually more empathetic for the child care credit than the child tax credit.
Tom, what's the difference?
The difference is that one's a credit because it's helping you to pay to drop a child off at a daycare center while you go to work, while you be productive, okay? Whereas the other is a credit for the fact of having a child, okay? And has nothing to do with whether you work or not, okay? So that's the difference. My question is, are you concerned, Destiny, and because this is one of my concerns, I'm concerned that you get the child tax credits or earned income credits or these other Harris proposals become entitlements. Because once you give them, it's really hard to take them away. Now, you can give them during COVID and take them away. You can say, oh, that was COVID. That's different. But you give them now, how do you take those away? Because what you're doing is, if you do take them away, you're actually giving that family a decrease in their standard of living. Are you really going to do that? And that just puts more pressure on the deficit. So what do you think about, do you think that they'll become entitlements?
I don't know. I mean, maybe, but regardless of if that's true or not, and we could go into the benefits and the pros and cons, I guess, of those credits, all of this would pale in comparison to any hypothetical destruction it would wrought on the economy compared to the global tariffs that Donald Trump is suggesting, which is just, that's like a doomsday scenario.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a second, if we can.
Let's talk about tariffs, because this is where
let's talk about the tariffs. So right now, today, the U.S. has a severe tax disadvantage to the rest of the world because the U.S. has no value-added tax. So if we export to France, that export gets a value-added tax of 20% tacked on. If we import from France, there's no value-added tax tacked on. So what that means is that the French production has an advantage on their exports over a U.S. export. Now, a tariff is one way.
Wait, can I ask a quick question on that?
Yes.
Because I genuinely don't understand this one. I thought that a value-added tax, I thought that you pay tax when you add value at a part in the production. If I were to export a good to France and they were to just sell it as is, can they VAT that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You VAT imports, you don't VAT exports. Exports are excluded, imports are taxed. 100%.
Okay. I'll take your word for it. Sure.
Yeah, 100%. So we have that disadvantage. And while I'm not a fan of a tariff being the solution to that, what is the difference in your mind from a 20% tariff on a good coming in from France and a 20% VAT on a good going into France? What's the difference? It's the same number. It's 20%.
I mean, I would have to read more of the comparison for the tariff stuff because I feel like let me think about that for a second.
Yeah, this is my whole thoughts on tariffs. Is we're just increasing the costs. We're indirectly passing down the cost to consumers.
No question. It increases the cost of goods. Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's in a way.
There's no question in all of the literature. There's no question that the consumer pays that tariff most of the time.
Sure. Well, I think it ends up being split kind of 50-50, right? Ultimately.
I think it's higher than that. I think the consumer pays more of that. Than the producer?
Yeah, because you have to eat some of the cost because the consumer isn't going to eat all of it. But the consumer will end up eating some.
Right. Presumably,
Wouldn't one difference be? Wouldn't one difference be?
Elasticity.
Wouldn't one different be for a tariff that a VAT is going to be applied evenly to everything in your economy, like things that are produced domestically as well? Whereas for a tariff,
correct, and that is the argument for the VAT over a tariff. You hit it right on, and that's why the Tax Foundation doesn't have a problem with VAT, but they do have a problem with tariff. But when you're looking at comparative purposes and you're going, still, we're making it cheaper to buy a French good, a good from France, than the French buy the same good. Perfect example is Boeing versus Airbus. Airbus, no VAT when they send it to the US. Boeing, VAT when you send it to France. That's a perfect example of a competitive disadvantage that we have. And absent us doing a VAT, which is wildly unpopular in the US, they actually tried that during Trump's first term, something similar, a border tax, something like a VAT. It's not popular. Frankly, the only way it would ever be popular is if you eliminated the income tax entirely by repealing the 16th Amendment. And then I think people might be okay with it. But until then, the challenge is, you still do have a competitiveness issue when it comes to goods made in America shipped to France versus goods made in France shipped to America.
Let's walk down this path for a minute.
Sure.
If that is the case, are we not just gaining an advantage by their government spending money to make a good or service cheaper for a U.S. citizen?
For who? An advantage to whom?
So, like, let's say, for instance,
producer.
Like, if you're talking about,
you are making it cheap. You are saying it is an advantage. It is an absolute advantage to the American consumer.
Yeah. So then, so the argument would be,
it's a disadvantage to the American producer.
Well, so the issue that I have with saying it's a disadvantage to the American producer, I would agree with that if our production was hurting. But if we're deploying our capital in more productive ways, then isn't that just a net win for us? Like in the United States, let's say that we make like macro widgets, right? But we don't make any micro widgets. But the micro widgets are what are used to make macro widgets, right? Let's say that we import something from China-stan or whatever, right? And let's say that China is like, oh, we're going to subsidize the fuck out of it and VAT and whatever to make it so we can export you a ton of micro widgets. With your economy, wouldn't you go, okay, well, if you guys want to waste your government spending and tax your citizens and all that to subsidize your shit, then we'll just buy that at reduced cost and we'll just make macro widgets, which is a more productive deployment of capital anyway. Aren't we just like winning from that exchange? Isn't that good? Like, the other hand, it feels like what we're saying is like, hold on, we're not going to let you do that. You're not allowed to fuck your citizens over and give us an advantage. We're going to screw our citizens over too so that nobody wins. And now we're going to bring all this base manufacturing back here. We don't want to make Teslas anymore. We want to make gearboxes and we want to make wheels and we want to make fenders instead. Like, I don't know why that would be the answer, I guess. I don't understand that, the connection there. Yeah.
If you were saying, well, China's going to give Chinese, they're going to make up for it to the Chinese producer, okay, in order for them, those two to offset, you might have a point. But the U.S. doesn't do that. We don't say, look, Boeing, we're going to somehow reduce your costs by 20% because you're going to have to increase your price by 20% when you send it to France. We don't do that. So maybe if we did some kind of a mechanism like that, maybe you're right. Maybe that would work.
Well, why do we even need to do some kind of?
Well, you were just talking about China. They're incentivizing that, but they're penalizing their producers if they're incentivizing us.
Doesn't it free us up to do more like productive stuff though? Would I be more proud? And this gets into very loaded, like normatively loaded territory because people feel a certain type of way about base level manufacturing, like, oh, I want to make cars again and then Detroit and the whatever jobs, right? And I understand to some extent, like there are emotional ties to that, but like people aren't scrambling to buy China's airplanes or Russia's airplanes. They're scrambling to buy F-35s from the United States, right? Elon Musk didn't go to make SpaceX or Tesla.
Right, but there's a reason that they're not scrambling to buy Chinese electric cars, and it's only because of tariffs.
Do you really think that? You don't?
Oh,
wait,
absolutely.
Wait.
Because we actually prohibit it.
Wait.
We don't
You don't think?
we don't just add tariffs. We don't let them sell their Chinese cars. When was the last time you saw a Chinese electric car in the U.S.?
Do you think that all of the higher level goods that the United States produces, you don't think they're that much better than any other part in the world?
No, absolutely not. No. Do you think U.S. cars are better made than Japanese cars?
I don't know. I don't know if
you think a Chevy is a better made car than a BMW?
I don't think automobiles would be the thing I would would push for.
I'm just looking at an example that is, I think, a pretty relevant and obvious example, because cars are one of those things that we make and other countries make.
Sure, but when we're thinking about I
will tell you, my wife loves the Hondas and she loves the BMWs. I've never seen her even consider buying a Chevy.
Sure, but when we think about like one of the largest export markets I think we have is related to like information technology and services around services around that. This is something that America does better than the rest of the world, right?
Agreed. Mm-hmm.
And I don't see
that right now. What you're seeing right now. So let's go to that one. So that's where we come back to this global minimum tax. What you're seeing is Europe is after those global technologies to tax them heavier, because yes, we're better. I mean, we're first. We're better. We own that. We literally own that market worldwide. Now, we're not better in things like semiconductors. Taiwan owns that market. We're trying to get that over here. In my backyard in Phoenix, we got two big plants going on. One, we're trying to bring those Taiwanese semiconductors over here, which I think is actually, I like the semiconductor bill because of that. But the question, and so what other countries are doing is that they're actually, I think what's missing in the tariff discussion, and I'm not a huge tariff fan per se, what's missing in the tariff discussion is what other countries are doing. And so I think where you have to be able to say, well, wait a minute, you can't do this with impunity. We are not going to allow you to ship your cheap goods to the U.S. with impunity and then tax our goods with impunity so that we can't export those goods, which is exactly what Europe in particular is trying to do with the technology.
Why wouldn't those, if we think that taxes are bad, if we think that taxes are bad in the United States, if you're telling me that they disincentivize investment and they disincentivize all these other things, why is it that taxes are good when other countries use them against us?
I don't think taxes are, I actually don't think our current tax rates, I actually think our current tax rates are pretty appropriate. I don't want to see them increased significantly.
Which tariffs would do for everything, right?
Which I think, because there's, again, what we were talking about.
Well, sure, but I'm curious, what is the explanation? What is the explanation for it? Because it feels like when we talk about taxes in the U.S., it's like taxes are bad. We don't want to, tax this stuff because it discourages all these horrible things, and we don't want the government using the money. But then when it comes to other countries, and it's like they put huge VATs on our stuff, and they put massive, taxations on all of our imports. Why is it that taxes are good for those countries and it helps them, but it
doesn't help them? You said earlier, our inflation rate is lower and our production is higher than every other country in the world. That's part of the reason. If you look at Germany, Germany has a 70% tax rate. 70%.
Isn't that the point that tariffs might not be a good thing across the board?
Well, I think there are strong arguments, because I spend a lot of time with my friends at the Tax Foundation, and they really hate tariffs, okay? They really do. My challenge is I don't like this idea that that we pay taxes to other countries and don't expect them to pay taxes to us.
Yep. Wait. What do you mean?
It's a competitive issue.
Wait. How do we pay taxes to other countries if there's a VAT and we said that most of the cost is passed on to the consumer? Aren't they just making their own citizens pay the taxes?
Well, Yeah, but their citizens are paying those taxes, but some of it, as you said, some of it is passed on to us. The producer is going to pay some of the tax.
Well, it makes us less competitive.
It makes us the tougher part is it makes us less competitive. Because I mean, would you disagree that
which that's why Trump wants the tariffs in general?
The cost of production in the U.S. The reason we import so much is cost of production in the U.S. as a general rule is higher than the cost of production in a lot of other countries. That's why we buy clothing from Vietnam. It's cheaper to buy clothing from Vietnam than it is to buy clothing made in the U.S.
Yeah, but it also frees up our citizens to, one, have a higher standard of living, and two, buy other things, right? Like if I want to buy a new instrument for my kid at a local shop that produces, high quality trumpets, if I can go to Walmart and buy cheap clothes, I can buy like a custom made U.S. instrument at home. If all of a sudden we bring all our manufacturing back and now I have to buy, $50 for a pair of like children's like t-shirts or whatever because they're all made at home, I feel like there's an opportunity cost that's missing. It's almost like a broken windows fallacy.
I actually agree with that. I think that you have I would not want to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. at any cost.
Which is what the tariffs are designed to do, right? So I feel like it just hurts us in every single way.
What I'd like to see is the investment incentive so that, for example, I mean, take Musk and Teslas, okay? Not a lot of people to make a Tesla. It's all robotics. Right. And so it's innovation, it's technology. So what you want to see is rather than having it cheap because it's cheap labor and they're in sweatshops in Vietnam and Indonesia, you want it cheap because the technology's good. That's what I would like to see. I would like to see that's why it becomes cheap, not because of cheap labor.
Sure, but I mean, at the end of the day, these are all market forces competing with each other, right? Like at some point, machines are going to outperform humans. It just depends on how low the wages can be. But I mean, like there's weird moral values behind that too. Like we say, like, well, we don't want like there to be sweatshops in other countries. Well, what if you take away the sweatshops and then they go to like subsistence farming, right? Like sweatshops aren't great in the U.S., of course, and in a lot of countries, sure, but it might be like a country's path towards industrialization and middle-class wages eventually. Like there are roads and steps, and the country is free to negotiate as well, right? It's just one thing that I notice when we talk about a lot of like tax and econ policy is that for some reason, other countries are doing things that somehow are so good for them and they're screwing us over. But then if we were to do those things, if they become bad for us, and it makes me wonder. Like, I think that deportation and tariffs, these are both great examples of this. People will say, in one breath, they'll say Mexico has this unfair advantage because they have so much cheap labor. They're killing us in manufacturing. We can't allow this to happen. And then in the next breath, they'll say, we need to deport all these guys back to Mexico. And it's like, well, hold on. If they're killing us in manufacturing because of all their workers, why don't we just let them fucking come up here and then make it in the U.S.? Like, wouldn't that be better? Like, if we really think that that's like killing us, why not just like eat all their workers and have them come up here and, give them a path to citizenship and then make it here, right? Wouldn't that be better?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a supply side argument.
Yeah. So I guess when I look at like the people that support like the Trump tariffs they're just so bad. And like if you want to subsidize your economy and you want to make things cheap as hell and you want to do that to the detriment of your own economy, because I think in a lot of ways subsidies can be good and subsidies can be really bad. I think we both agree that there are good subsidies, bad subsidies. If you want to subsidize the craziest stuff out of your economy and then we get to import that, I mean we're just like gaining off of your crazy tax planning. And again, there's pros and cons to everything, but man, a 20% tariff across the board, that would just, like you agree, that would be like devastating to the U.S. economy, right? Like that would be more devastating than any $6,000 child tax credit or whatever, right?
Well, certainly more devastating than $6,000 child tax credit, baby tax credit. You know what? What's interesting is Biden, the one thing that he only kept one thing of Trump's, and that was tariffs. The only thing he kept. I just find that interesting.
Well,
I'm not going to make comment on it, but he did.
I'll make a comment on it. The difficulty I think when it comes to tariffs is it's very easy for me to tariff somebody. I can look at somebody and go 20% tariff, screw you. But obviously they're going to retaliate, right? Okay, well, fine, 20% tariff, screw you. To levy a tariff is easy, but to bring it down, well, now I have to negotiate some kind of deal because I can't just remove my tariff on you while you've tariffed me because now I'm getting screwed, right? So I think it's one of the reasons why the tariff stayed around is because we're already engaged in kind of an awkward trade war thing going on with China, geopolitically with Taiwan, economically, and trade-wise with chip manufacturing and everything. it's easy to levy a tariff. It's hard to take it down. So I'm not going to give Biden the same penalty for maintaining a tariff that Donald Trump laid on somebody, right? Okay. And I think that like the CHIPS Act was better for bringing manufacturing here for semiconductor manufacturing than even just the tariffs, from Trump himself.
I totally agree with that. I have another question for you. Mm-hmm. So Harris has proposed price controls.
Yeah, I was literally about
price controls on groceries, price controls on rent, lots of different price controls. Historically, that has not played well in other countries. What makes you think, or what makes even the Democrats think, that that's going to work here when it hasn't worked other places?
This is my favorite thing about the Democrats. I don't care what Kamala Harris says about price controls, because price controls are one of the most devastating ways that you can annihilate an economy. So I don't think that'll ever go through. I think that if Kamala said, we're going to do price controls, there would be 50 million people around here that would go, absolutely not. This is insane. Go out there and apologize and say you're not doing that shit. If Donald Trump says he's going to do 20% tariffs, you have to fall in line or he's going to annihilate your career. Right. I think that's the difference. So there are some things, not to revisit it, but like the concept of unrealized capital gains taxes and wealth taxes, for a large number of reasons, these are almost inconceivably difficult to levy. It's how do you evaluate? It's very, very difficult. I'm not even really concerned about it. I just don't think that an unrealized capital gains tax is ever coming because of how difficult it would be to levy and how much pushback she would get because the Democratic Party is such a white tent party. Look at what happened to Biden when he had a disastrous debate performance. The leftist media bullied him. He got bullied internally, and then people internally bullied him externally to make him leave.
Well, and you could say the same thing about Trump's proposal to not tax Social Security. It's frankly because that money actually goes back into the Social Security fund. The income tax on Social Security goes into the Social Security fund, and that would be untenable to pull that pull that money out.
But so
that's an example of, and Congress has to pass that. So I would say,
but the scary thing is,
a lot of these, Trump has made. I think some of Trump's tax proposals are not logical.
But the scary thing about some of Trump's stuff is that he can do a lot of it by executive action, which is the scary thing.
But he can taxes, tariffs, yes, taxes no.
Taxes probably not, but the tariffs yes, and the tariffs are one of the
taxes no.
Tariffs are one of the scariest things that he's talking about, though, right?
Tariffs yes. Tariffs yes. Now, do you think that an executive action like tariffs is, I suspect you do, is particularly worse than just unconstitutionally just wiping out student loan debt?
No, I think unconstitutionally wiping out student loan debt would be atrocious.
Which is what Biden attempted several times.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah,
I disagree.
He did. He was shut down by the courts.
Sure. So what you just said defeated the argument that you made, right? So the Constitution is what powers the legislature, the courts, and the executive. Biden, his statutory interpretation of the education bill that said that in times a president can forgive certain types of debt or whatever, he attempted the executive, their interpretation was, well, I can forgive this debt, and he tried it, and the Supreme Court said, we disagree with that interpretation, you can't, and then he said, oh, okay. I'll look and see what else I can do. I don't think that's violating the Constitution. The executive tried something that they thought that they had the statutory construction to do, and the court said, no, you don't have it. And then he
actually said, I know they're going to shut us down because I know this is not legal. I'm going to do it anyway because maybe I'll get away with it.
I don't know if that's exactly what he said.
Not exactly, but it's basically anyway.
I mean, if I was,
but you're right. You and I agree on one thing, and that is that anytime we can have balancing powers is a good thing.
Sure, but if I was worried about stuff like that, not to be a one-trick pony, but I'd be way more worried about like Donald Trump trying to remain in office after he lost the election, because that was the thing they were trying to do unconstitutionally. They were advocating for breaking a law, the ECA under Pence, and Eastman himself said that not only can we break this law, there will be no checks and balances because the Supreme Court won't touch this because they'll invoke the political questions doctrine and they won't get involved. So we can just do this. That's arguably above the above the court and eliminating checks and balances. So
arguably, so you have it on both sides, which doesn't make either one right.
Well, hold on. That's not on both sides. It's absolutely what they tried to do on the Trump side, unequivocally, and they said as much. I don't believe Biden said, I'm going to go above the Constitution and I'm going to defy the Supreme Court and do all these things. Trump's side did say that.
And Destiny, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're essentially saying price controls, bad idea, even unrealized capital gains, probably not going to happen. But you're saying that probably won't happen. Whereas you're saying that Trump, if he gets elected, he can almost be a mob boss, do tariffs without any checks and balances. And he's way more likely to do that.
Yeah, I don't want to I don't want to come off as like overly political, but like Trump, I'm going to sound like Trump operates like an authoritarian insofar as he wants to centralize a lot of power in the executive, not really the executive, the presidency. So Donald Trump will outfit himself with a lot of people that are willing to go really far with the things that he wants to do in terms of executive control, and he's got a court that's very favorable to him right now. So I'm worried about the types of things that Trump could do, because if you go against Trump, Trump will try to destroy your career. That's what he does, right? He attacks everybody that opposes him in the party. Whereas in the Democratic Party, you kind of have to play ball more with everybody in the party because it's a wider tent and you've got a wider constituency, and the party is just a little bit more live. Where if today Kamala Harris said, "Screw the Democrat Party, I'm walking away," the Pelosi and everybody else were like, "Okay, I guess we're going to throw somebody else up in here." If Donald Trump said, "Screw the Republican Party, I'm running as an independent," the Republican Party loses 75% of their constituents. It's so that's a lot scarier to me. I feel like the potential for executive power overreach and abuse is a lot higher with Trump. That's my feeling.
Go ahead, Caleb.
Well, I mean, this comes down to the big debate around Trump. I guess you said you didn't want to get super political, but I feel like it's bleeding into what is the reason you hate Trump so much, and can you boil that thesis down? Because we're talking about, I feel like we're talking and agree a lot on the same policies, but like you obviously hate Donald Trump. A lot of the people that agree with you around the tax side are voting Republican. So I just wonder what the disconnect is. And then obviously January 6th is like a huge talking point.
Yeah, I mean,
but then
I think
if you take a step back, like he was president for four years, and I don't understand why people think like it's just going to be game over if he becomes president again. And and again, I know that this is not the first time you've heard that question, but that's just it seems like the liberals, their only talking point, it seems like Kamala's only talking point is Trump, horrible. And it seems it's just like, that's like their only talking point. And it almost seems exhausting. So I guess that's just feedback on like and it might be working. I mean, I actually do believe that Trump lost the election because of Trump, not because of Biden. And so I like, it's one of those things where it's like, I can see both sides. He's an exhausting person, but I also, I'm not as afraid as that he's going to like take over and like stay in office. Like those are the kind of things that maybe it's like they didn't move the needle for me, but it clearly moves the needle for half
It's an
America.
interesting point, because I get why they can move the needle for somebody. They certainly move the needle for my wife who can't stand Donald Trump. Okay. But for me, I'm more afraid of the Democrats, because the Democrats want to eliminate the filibuster. They want to put term limits on the Supreme Court, basically reverse the majority in the Supreme Court on day one by doing their term limits that retroactive effect. Those types of things actually eliminate checks and balances. I like the filibuster because I like the idea that you've got that check and balance. You have to negotiate. If you have a 50+1 vote on everything, and you're going down a slippery slope when you go, okay, you did it once for the budget. Now then you did it for federal judges. Now you're going to do it for abortion. Then you're going to do it for voting laws. Where does that stop?
Well, sure. I guess so. Like a question on
the filibuster goes away completely,
sure,
meaning that you only have to have 50+1.
A question on if you don't like the elimination of the filibuster, what do you think was the most egregious elimination of the filibuster in U.S. history? It was when McConnell denied Barack Obama checks and balances, right? The presidential right granted in the Constitution to appoint and have his nomination heard.
Supreme Court judge.
Yeah. So
Yep.
if we're talking
He should not have done that. I agree. He should not have done that.
Well, but it's not just that he shouldn't have done it. That is the most egregious. If the Republicans right now could pass something with favor from Donald Trump, but in order to do so, they'd have to eliminate the filibuster. Do you really think that the filibuster would survive?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do. There are Republican senators that absolutely would not vote. So remember, the only reason we still have the filibuster is because of Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. Without those two, we wouldn't have the filibuster because the Democrats tried to get rid of it this term.
So I don't think that the filibuster would survive pressure from Donald Trump. I think there's ample evidence to show that the Republican Party will go along with basically anything Donald Trump says. And like right now, there's no guarantee. There's no guarantee that a Democrat president will ever get another Supreme Court justice if there is a majority in the Senate that are Republicans. Like, you have no reason to think that. If you're a Democrat and the Republicans have the Senate and a Supreme Court justice dies, there's no reason why you should think you're ever getting another Supreme Court justice, as long as the Republicans are 50 plus 1 in the Senate. And I think if we're worried about things like checks and balances and the filibuster in the Supreme Court, that's a big issue. When you talk about term, who got rid of the filibuster on federal judges? The Democrats did that. The Republicans didn't do it. The Democrats voted that, not the Republicans. The Republicans just took it to the logical next step and said, well, we're going to do it for Supreme Court justices too, because they're federal judges. So would I agree? Should we have a 60 vote requirement for federal judges? Yeah, I think that'd be great. Sure. I mean, like, we can talk about the original the original attack on the filibuster, but again, it was because Republicans didn't want to nominate any of the judges that were being put forth, right? Like, the issue is when Republicans try to bog down government and destroy it and try to make it, McConnell literally said, my goal is to make Obama a one-term president. People like Lindsey Graham literally said, well, listen, if they're in their last year, we're not going to give them another Supreme Court pick. That's fair. And then he reversed it on Trump, right? They have no values. They have no principles. The issue that I have with Donald Trump is I feel like he is fundamentally an un-American person. The way that he runs the presidency and the executive and the way that he undermines every part of the U.S. government. When you look at his leadership as president, it was abhorrent in every single way, right? What is Trump trying to take credit for now? It's funnily enough, we talked earlier about how disastrous price controls are. What is one of the things that Donald Trump wants to take credit for is the price control on insulin. We talk about how bad government spending is. What is Donald Trump saying he wants to take credit for now? The ACA and pre-existing conditions, the thing that he tried to kill day one when he came into office. So I think that Donald Trump is just, he conducts himself in a way where he wants to centralize power in the executive. He wants to deny the outcome of the last election. He doesn't even agree that the last election results were real. He doesn't even agree in the 2016 election results. He says that 3 million illegals voted with no evidence. A guy like this who fights against all the institutions, tries to defy the peaceful transfer of power, constantly spreads lies and misinformation, attacks his opponents, is an ineffective leader. He can't get any major legislation passed. He can't get his own party to support him on stuff sometimes, and then commits crimes and goes before his Supreme Court that he's gotten 3 appointments on and says, I want criminal immunity because when I'm president, I can't commit crimes. That's just a person that I don't want anywhere near the presidency. That's insane to me. I think that that's a deeply un-American figure that I just don't want wielding the executive power.
I certainly understand that point of view. Going back to major legislation, though, 2017 Tax Act was the biggest piece of tax legislation, the most major change in tax law since 1986.
It was just deficit spending, though, right?
No, it wasn't just deficit spending. It wasn't.
It was.
Was there some? Yes.
No. It all what?
It wasn't. No, it wasn't. So you raised $1 trillion by eliminating the state and local tax deduction. By the way, the state and local tax deduction has no business being in the law. There is no reason to give a state and local tax deduction. There's no theoretical premise for giving a state and local tax deduction. That raised $1 trillion. So you can't say that it was all giveaways because it wasn't. There was a lot of revenue raised, $2 trillion. You can look this up. $2 trillion came back to the U.S. because of the 2017 Act. That's $2 trillion we didn't have.
Okay? Sure, but like,
So yes, was there a deficit as a result of the 2017 law? Yes. However, the 2017 changes in the law, some of them were massively positive, including, by the way, the only part of that law that is permanent, which is the corporate tax rate.
Sure, but there's 2 things. One, the 10-year impact and then beyond of like those Trump tax cuts, I'm pretty sure far outweighs any money gained from SALT. And 2, doesn't Donald Trump say he wants to bring back state and local tax deductions?
Well, that's a dumb idea.
But he says he wants to bring it back. So even the part you're giving him credit for here, we can't even, right? We don't even know if it's going to stay.
I get it. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Why not?
Well, the same reason we're not getting an unrealized capital gains tax, because that's not going to happen. There's too many people that don't want it.
The difference is that when the Democrats say, Kamala, don't do this, Kamala says, okay, fuck, I won't do this. But when somebody says Donald Trump, don't do this, Donald Trump is out the next day saying, Kemp, that guy's a schmuck. I should have never supported him. We got some good guys in Congress that do good work for us, but not these guys, not these never Trumper, these evil, horrible Republicans.
So this is where, because I have friends in Congress. I have friends that are Republicans in Congress. I know them personally. They do have they do have a backbone. I disagree that the Republicans, there's nobody with a backbone.
To be fair, and I would I would talk to any of these people. There are no invertebrates that are more spineless than the Republicans in the House. I'm sorry, no offense to your friend. If any of them want to argue with it, I would love to argue with any of them, but absolutely not. There is no backbone in the Republican Party, in the lawmaking body. Unless you're ready to retire, you're never standing up to Donald Trump because it's the end of your career. He'll primary you, literally. He does it. He'll primary you.
What's your thoughts on
people
Thomas
consider
Massie?
McCarthy a rhino now. McCarthy, a rhino. They couldn't even hold onto their speaker seat, a historic event in the United States where the majority party loses their speaker seat, and they're begging the Democrats, can you guys help us maintain our majority seat here? Like that's unbelievable. That's ungovernable. That's crazy.
Destiny, what's your thoughts on Thomas Massie? He seems like he has a backbone and doesn't just get in line.
I don't know enough about him, unless you can give me information about him, but I don't know enough about him. But what's he done to resist any of Trump's?
He doesn't support Israel when it comes to the wars, and he's very big on cutting spending, and he doesn't even get in line with a lot of the Republican agendas, and so that's just an example of someone who's doesn't necessarily make friends on either side. But I would agree with you that there are majority.
One of the challenges I have with the Democrats is that we had two Democrats, one sort of an independent, my own Kirsten Sinema, Arizona's Kirsten Sinema. We had two Democrats who would stand up. I don't know. Do we have Democrats who will stand up to? And I'm not saying Harris. I say whoever is running things, because I don't for a second believe Harris is in charge there. But do we have Democrats who will stand up to the Democratic establishment?
I mean, the president is literally not running for re-election as an incumbent. That's a pretty big.
Right. He was. There was a coup there. That's right. So he was kicked out. That's right. That's the Democratic establishment that did that.
Well, sure. Let's say that I grant you that. You just asked me, did the Democrats ever stand up to their leadership? And then you said there was a coup. I mean, what more? How could you stand up to your leadership more than by having a coup, right?
You're suggesting Biden was their leader, and I don't believe that.
Well, then it wasn't a coup then, right? It was just
For a second. So what I'm asking is, because this is important when it comes to things like the filibuster and things like these big changes that the Democrats want to make. We had two. We had Sinema and Manchin. Are there others, do you think, that will stand up to the Democratic establishment to give us some checks and balances? I think there are in the Republicans. That I realize you probably don't agree with me on that.
Let me ask you this:
my question is, who would you point to in the Democratic Party that is going to stand up to the Democratic establishment?
I mean, literally anybody. One of the most popular Democrats, made a name for themselves fighting other establishment Democrats. We watched AOC and Pelosi, wage war against each other for years. We saw Biden, being forced to step down. We've seen liberal media attacking, the Democrats.
This is all from the Democratic establishment.
What?
But what is your thoughts on Matt Gaetz and the craziness that went? I mean, that's never happened.
He's a complete.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is like it's not like all the Republicans get in line, and you know what I'm saying.
The Republicans. I mean, there were enough. There were 11
I think we
Republicans.
all agree the Republicans are a mess. I think the Republicans are a mess.
There were 11 Republicans that were willing to go along with Donald Trump in trying to coup the government on January 6th, right? He found people to sponsor the J6 objections to the certification of the vote, right? This is insane. There are people that they didn't vote for his impeachment for partisan reasons in the Senate. They didn't convict for it. Just, I don't know. That's just wild to me.
Destiny, do you believe that the Supreme Court needs to be either packed or termed out? And what's your thoughts on the filibuster?
I have never. People don't like me for this. I think the filibuster is okay. I think that having 60 vote majorities on passing major legislation, I think that's fine. I think it's good to have some bipartisanship. Now, you need another party to govern with, and right now we don't have one in the United States, unfortunately. But when it comes to the Supreme Court, I've never heard a good argument against term limits. The Supreme Court, as we have it right now, which is like the wacky democracy casino, where every 4 years you get a president who might nominate anywhere from 0 to 4 Supreme Court justices, is absolutely fucking wild. I have never in my life heard a good argument against terming it so that like every president is guaranteed one pick or something like that. I think that would be a much better system, a more democratic system, a more checks and balances system, a more fair system. And the only reason I can see somebody opposing it is because they like the composition of the court right now, basically.
I would be curious what you think about term limits for Congress, because my thought is to Congress, who says we want term limits on Supreme Court, you first.
Congress is voted in every 2 years or every 6 years, right?
They have no term limits.
Yeah, but they have to win re-election. The Supreme Court justice, a Supreme Court justice can get on the bench.
Wait. I understand that. However, because they don't have term limit, are you kidding? Why would you ever vote out somebody with seniority in your party? That's ridiculous. You would lose the seniority unless everybody has to be voted out for seniority.
I don't understand what you're saying. People get voted out from parties in ways that are catastrophic.
If you had no. Why would you ever vote? I mean, you're complaining about Mitch McConnell. I get your complaints. Okay. Now, why would anybody vote out Mitch McConnell, who has that much power because of his seniority, if instead you're going to give it to Chuck Schumer, who has all of that because he gets to stay in longer? Why would you put in a rookie senator when you've got an established power broker?
That's exactly where AOC came from. AOC primaried one of the most powerful, like the person who was supposed to be the runner-up leader to Pelosi. AOC primaried that person as like a 15-year-old, and she kicked him out of Congress, right? Like,
well, I would tell you that's the exception that proves the rule. I would say it's just an exception. That's not the norm. I'm just asking what you think. Why not have term limits for congressmen and for
I'm just saying it's okay to have like powerful people in Congress. Congress is what?
Interesting.
Congress is a big body. Like 3 or 4 or 5 Congress people, right? What is it? 438 House members, right? And then 100 in the Senate, right?
100 in the Senate.
Yeah. If you've got a few people in Congress or a few people in the Senate, that's one thing. But if you've got 3 Supreme Court justices, 435, sorry. If you've got 3 Supreme Court justices who are willing to go in a certain way, and you can't vote them out. There's no ethics guidelines. There's no checks and balances. I guess you could pass a constitutional amendment, but that's a much scarier situation, I think. And it's something that's because what are the checks and balances on the Supreme Court?
I think this is a really interesting conversation. I do want to take this back to the tax and economy, and let's talk about what Kamala and Trump seem to agree on, which is no tax on tips. I personally think it's
a terrible idea.
Well, Len, I would love to hear why you think that, and then Destiny, what is your thoughts?
Why are you? What's the benefit to the economy? What's the benefit to the U.S. to not tax tips? What's the benefit?
I take a different approach. I worked in McDonald's and I hate tip workers. Screw you. Pay taxes on your tips.
Okay, so you guys both agree.
The thing is, here's the thing. If we've decided that an income tax is part of the way that we tax income, is part of the way that we gain, money for the federal government and the state governments, then you tax income. You don't pick, like, imagine somebody comes out and they're like, we think that lumberjacks are the most important people, so we're not going to tax anybody that cuts down trees. Like, why is stupid? Like, why would you not tax tips as income?
Next question, the $25,000 first-time home buyers that Kamal is talking about, you even referenced that this early on, Destiny, that you're not necessarily in favor of that. I see problems with it. I see it kind of could screw up demand, supply, and all. What are your guys' takes on the $25,000? And I also want to just point out that both Trump and Kamala are just trying to buy votes. They're trying to say all kinds of things, and will any of this stuff actually happen? I don't know.
Well, also, as a quick thing, there's nothing wrong with buying votes. You're a politician. That's what you're supposed to do. Earn my vote, right? If it's going to be through tax cuts or through stimulus, fuck, I don't care. As long as I get money, I don't care. Personally, as a quick thing, some people view certain things that people should have, and they think that it's unethical to have a free market do these things because they're essential goods or services, right? Everybody should be guaranteed a house or food or whatever. I don't think that matters. What matters is what can markets solve for and what can markets not solve for. We don't have to give people free food and clothes because markets solve for food and clothing pretty well. Houses are solved for really well by the free market when they have the ability to create supply. The issue that you're running into right now is a physics problem, which is you're trying to take every single person in the country and have them live in 7 cities, and you're assuming that if we just give these people enough money, it'll be possible. You can't. It's not going to happen. You have to free up the ability for people to make houses, and how that happens is a whole other thing. But giving money to people is just going to make everything more expensive when it comes to housing, I think.
Tom, do you agree with that?
Well, I do think that, so one thing I would definitely agree with in Kamala's approach is I do like the idea of improving the low-income housing tax credit. That has proven over the years to work. I know it's confusing. It's a confusing credit. It's a very big credit. And what it does is...
Can you explain the credit?
It's almost as much as 70% of the cost to build is a credit over the lifetime of the building. Okay, so basically the entrepreneur who's building the housing actually basically pays 30% of it. The government pays 70% over time. Okay, it's not a one-time credit. It's complicated, but it has proven to work. And the private-public partnerships are very interesting. And that's what a low-income housing tax credit is. That's what, frankly, the solar energy credits are. That's what the intangible drilling cost deduction for oil and gas is. That's what business deductions are. These are all basically a partnership between the government and the entrepreneur. And so I like that kind of a partnership if we're going to have an income tax. Now, I'm not a huge fan of an income tax because that's a tax on production. I think there are better taxes. But we have an income tax. We're stuck with it. It's not going to change.
Tom, if you could change it, the income and no income tax, do you see a world where that would make sense?
Well, I mean, you mean I can wave a magic wand and eliminate?
Yeah, like if you were.
Yeah, I'd put in a value-added tax instead.
What is your thoughts on that, Destiny?
That's a whole. It's like asking me if humans could be based on silicon instead of carbon.
It is just like that. Actually, it's just not. It's not politically possible.
I don't remember who said it. I'll just say Churchill said it because everybody gives every quote to him. It's like what Americans consider imagine like the end of the world and the end of capitalism or something. I can't even. I've heard people argue for VAT. I've heard people argue for a land value tax. I don't know what would be the best.
I've heard a consumption tax.
Well, that's a value-add tax. Is a consumption tax.
Well, yeah. I don't like consumption taxes as much because I'm a big believer in marginal utility. It's a lot easier for me to give up 10% of my income than for a poor person to give up 10% of their income. And I don't think that your consumption scales percentage-wise with the money that you make. So I feel like consumption taxes hurt. I think progressive income taxes are good, or some kind of progressive taxation is good because it hurts poor people more to pay taxes than wealthier people.
Trump just said that, no tax on overtime. Do you guys have the same belief as no tax on
terrible idea. What you get is manipulation. Now, think about this, Caleb. Every one of your employees wants to be non-exempt because they want overtime, and they're going to be less efficient. There's nothing good in this. You can't not tax overtime. It's just a bad idea. It's like not taxing tip.
And Destiny, I would assume you would agree.
Yeah,
okay.
We have taxes.
So
if we want these taxes, we need to have the taxes. We need to not have if Trump comes out tomorrow and he's like, I'm not going to tax white cars, and Kamala's like, I'm not going to tax cars that are the colors of the rainbow. It's like, what are we going to tax them or not? All
right. So this is really, and we talked a little bit early on, but I think this is the real question: is one party literally we will pay less in taxes across the board. I know that maybe some people say that in Kamala's world, you'll keep you could talk about that, Tom, but at the end of the day, under Trump's economy, we are going to pay less in taxes and versus pay more taxes under Kamala Harris's. Number one, do you agree with that statement that I just made? And number two, why is one better than the other? I think that really comes down. We agree on lots of things, and I just fundamentally lean towards I can do better with my money than the government.
but maybe that's a libertarian conservative talking point, and I'm very open to hearing thoughts on this, especially from you, Destiny, because I would imagine you would disagree with that statement.
Do you want me to answer first, or?
Yeah, go ahead,
you-
Destiny.
yeah.
I'm real interested.
So this is what I would say. What you pay in taxes is only half of the question, and the other half is how much money did you make. Like, not exaggerating, I probably pay about 100 times, like 2 orders of magnitude in taxes more now than I paid when I was a carpet cleaner. I much prefer my life now than when I cleaned carpet. It's not even close, okay? I think when I lived in California, my effective tax rate was climbing north of like 40%. My life was way better then when my effective tax rate was almost zero when I was working before I streamed. So taxes are one part of the equation and income is another part. And that same equation blows up to the entirety of the economy, right? If there's an economy that has higher levels of taxation that produces an overall better welfare for its citizenry, that economy might be better than another economy that taxes people less but is overall smaller, right? If you tell me you're a top 1% earner in your country, I'm like, damn, that's awesome. And you're like, yeah, I'm from Somalia. It's like, not knocking Somalia, but like, okay, well, I mean, like, good job, I guess. Whereas, like, if you're in the United States, do we pay more taxes? Yeah, I do. But I wish that people would just kind of like keep in mind, like, when you pay taxes, like, for me to work in the United States, okay, I'm sitting in front of a camera and I am speaking to a lot of people and I make a lot of money doing it. I can only do that because people are willing to be janitors at electric power plants with materials that are, you know, brought into this country by guys working at harbors who are, you know, willing to drive trucks across the country and do all this miserable labor for 1/10, 1/20th, 1/50th of what somebody like me gets paid. The only way that I can do what I do at the top of this income chain is because of all the other people down the stairs from me. So, and the difference is that, like, if I break my leg, I can do a donation drive on my stream, go to the hospital, pay cash, and be fine. If a truck driver's daughter gets sick and he has to stay home from work, he might be facing financial ruin. So if you're going to come to somebody like me and say, Destiny, you got to pay an extra $20,000 in tax, man, to keep this shit working, I don't even have to think about it. I'm like, yeah, sure, obviously. I'm in one of the best countries in the world that lets me be the best version of myself, and the only reason I can do that is because of all the other people that are working to keep it going. So when you pay taxes, like, that's the system that you're building towards, and I wish people would keep that in mind a little bit when it comes to thinking of taxation rather than just the government stealing my money because they hate me.
And so I'm going to ask a question a different way. If it wasn't Trump, if it was like Kamala versus Kamala, but Kamala on one side was saying, hey, we're going to raise taxes versus no, like, would you, like...
This is the way that I look at it very simply. I don't attach normative value to taxes. If you're a billionaire, then fucking A, you're a billionaire. That's great. If you want to tax somebody a lot or a little, okay, whatever. At the end of the day, here's what I care about. This is what you want to spend. This is your spending. And this is how much you need to earn to spend it. So when it comes to figuring out what our tax rate should be, it's just like if you give somebody, if you guys do financial consulting, you know, if somebody comes to you and they say, fuck, man, I'm running out of money every month. The first thing that you tell them, you don't tell them you need to earn more money or you need to spend less. What you tell them is make a budget. What are you trying to spend money on? Figure out what our programs are that we need, and then once we figure that out, figure out the appropriate level of taxation and the best way to raise the money. So when you ask me right now, like, do I want more or less taxes? I don't know. I think about, like, right now it seems like we need more taxes because we've got a lot of spending. If there are spending programs that we can get rid of, or if there's spending we can decrease that won't have a massive negative outlay on our country or our citizenry, then we cut those programs. If there's not, then we need to tax more because I like living in the United States and I like the things that we offer here. And I think there's a reason why people like Elon Musk come to the US to build things, and I want to maintain that. But yeah, that's what I would look at. I don't have like a normative value on like taxes are good or bad or spending is good or bad. Just like find out what we want to fund and then fund it. Yeah.
For some reason, I thought you were more progressive when it comes to like higher tax, but the way you answer that is something I respect, appreciate, and probably would give a very similar answer because I am not in favor of out of control spending, and it's a problem. No one wants to talk about it, and the problem with our financial system is no one's incentivized to talk about it.
Sure.
Which is
So, but just be careful, Tom, when you talk about that out of control spending. Like, people will say things like, because earlier we were talking about how much we love the low income credit for like housing and everything, right? I'm pretty sure this comes through HUD, like housing and urban development, and you're talking about Trump, who wants to put people like Elon Musk in charge, who are probably going to look to slash those programs first. So I mean, what are you going to do? Yeah.
So I think it's a little more complicated. than raising taxes or not. We, by the way, historically, we have one of the lowest tax rates in the world, and we have one of the lowest tax rates we've ever had, if you look at everything combined. So the tax rates really are not exorbitant right now. Okay, could they become exorbitant? Yes, they could. And is that a slippery slope? Yes, it is. I'm more concerned about what's taxed and how we're taxed. Because, like I said, if you want to put a 5% surtax on everybody making over $10 million a year, I have no issue with that. Go for it. That nobody's going to care. They're not going to care. The people making more than $10 million, they're not going to care. They pay an extra 5%. No problem. I think they'd be just like Destiny. On the other hand, you raise the tax on investment on capital gains by 60%. That's challenging for me, because any drag, I'd like to see less drag. I'm a huge Art Laffer fan, as it turns out. I actually, Destiny, I know Art Laffer, and I'm a big fan of his work. I think you can put a very big drag on investment, okay, and it can drag down an economy, and reducing certain taxes can spur an economy. Now, can you reduce them to nothing? No. But for example, Trump's proposal to reduce the income tax, the corporate income tax on manufacturers from 21% to 15%, I think that's a good, I like that proposal. I like that one. That's actually reducing a very specific tax for manufacturers. It is encouraging manufacturers. I thought the corporate tax rate being reduced from 35% to 21% was excellent, because what I didn't like was the Democrats, the day after the day after the Democrats took power in 2023, they said, we're going to get rid of we're going to raise the tax rate back up on corporations, because what it does is it creates instability when it comes to the rest of the world. The rest of the world would like to see some stability, which I know is like an oxymoron in the U.S., stability in the U.S., right? We just have none. Okay, part of it's our election system. Part of it is just who we have and what's going on in the world. But my point is I think you do have to look at, both candidates have good policies and bad policies. Okay, I'm hopeful that there's enough negotiation in it that some of the good policies went out and the bad policies don't. Just like you're suggesting, Destiny, we don't have an unrealized capital gains tax. We don't have a tax on gifts. We don't have a 33% tax. I actually think that one probably would happen if the Democrats swept next week. I think we'd get that 33% tax rate on capital gains. And I think that would hurt. I think that would hurt. Would it be devastating? Not like Biden's proposal to raise it to 45%. Biden had proposed raising it to 45%. Harris said, no, we're going to raise it to 33%. Much more reasonable proposal. I still think, I like capital gains rates low. I think taxes on investing are a bad idea in general, because I think that the more capital that people have for investing, the better off we are, because I like to see money go back into investment, not just into consumption.
Destiny, any final thoughts? I have one or two more questions, but I appreciate both your time. Any thoughts on where we've gotten so far tonight?
I mean, when I think about stability, I mean, I agree, but like I've made this complaint a few times. I wish in my lifetime, one Democrat got to come in without everything being completely destroyed and got to govern, and it was Bill Clinton, and we had budget surpluses. I think that's the last time we did. And then we had George W. Bush, who gave us Iraq. I'm not going to blame him for 9/11. I won't do that. I'll blame the Jews. No, I'm just kidding. So we had 9/11, and then we had the whole Middle East fiasco under Bush, which was a disaster. Then we had the 2007, 2008 housing collapse. that was a worldwide financial catastrophe. And then after that, a Democrat has to come in, Obama, to come off the back of that horrendous thing, which was destroying the entire world economy. And you have you've got an ungovernable Republican Senate on top of that, right? Who's for 6 years. Again, McConnell was a disaster for Obama. Then after that, we get Trump for 4 years. Okay, Obama, we turn around the entire economy. We do TARP. The government makes money on getting the loans back. We do all this stuff, right? Obama turns things around. Since 2013 onward, we're posting all-time highs in the markets again. The economy is growing. Trump comes in, does even more deficit spending, adds more to the debt, and then we have the BLM riots, which we don't have to blame Trump for, but if it happened under a Democrat president, we'd blame the Democrat president. And then we had this horrible, in my opinion, mishandling of COVID, and it was mishandled so poorly for two reasons. I mean, like two things we can look at. One, Trump denied it even existed until there were like tens of thousands of cases here, and then two, even when Trump, the only thing I could give him credit for, like warp speed, most of his audience doesn't even like it because of how much he undermined our institutions while he was there. And then after COVID, now we bring in another Democrat president, Biden, who again, what do they say? Oh, and not to mention January 6th and all that. They always say, what's going to happen? 8 years of Obama is going to be communism. It didn't happen. We got the ACA that the Republicans hated. Trump comes in and he tries to destroy it. Now he wants to take credit for pre-existing conditions. Obama passes this in the midst of the 2007-2008 crisis, right? Biden comes in for 4 years. American Reinvestment Plan, American Recovery Plan. We've got the CHIPS Act. We're bringing manufacturing back. They're saying, well, look, the Democrats under Biden, who had to come in after Trump's disaster, are causing inflation. We're beating the rest of the world on inflation, and we have to come in after the disaster of COVID and Trump's denial of it even happening. And now Trump wants to take the reins again, and it's like, Jesus, I wish we could get a Democrat to come in and get to govern for 4 to 8 years without having to clean up the disaster of the last Republican president just to like clean the car and then hand the keys over to them again and say, please, like, bring this back in one piece again for our next turn in office, is just my feelings on it.
Yeah, but if you look back, the Democrats have been in power more than the Republicans the last 20 years.
Is that...
So it's like your talking points. It's like, really, I know Trump makes a splash, but it was Obama, Trump, Biden.
Wait, hold on. I could be wrong. I'm sorry. I suck. My brain is fried. Bush Jr. was 2 terms, right?
Right, and Clinton was 2 terms.
Yeah, so it was 8 years. I mean, I guess it depends on where we start. It was 8 years of Clinton. It was 8 years of Bush, and then it was 8 years of Obama. Then it was 4 years of Trump, and then it was 4 years of Biden. It seems like we've been pretty equal, right?
I mean, if you look at the last 16
no, there's
years.
8 more years of Democrats in there.
Well, it depends on where you want to start, right? Like,
it does. But if you start at Clinton, then yes, there would be 8 more years of Democrats. But of course, before Clinton, we had 4 years of Bush Sr. and we had 8 years of Reagan.
Yeah.
So in total, it comes out about even, Caleb. I mean, my lifetime, it's about even, Stephen.
Tom, I got a question.
Well, I'm just saying, wait, do we agree at least that, like, it seems like crazy disasters happen under Republicans, and then Democrats are brought in to govern next and have to.
I don't know about that. I mean,
what is your thoughts on the wars going on right now?
We had no wars under Trump, and we have big wars under Biden.
Wait, so to be clear, we had tons of wars under Trump, no?
No.
I mean, this is a good. No new wars started.
Hold on, wait. I don't know why new wars matters. Okay, so under Trump, we had drone strikes and bombing in Yemen that increased. We assassinated Soleimani in Iraq. We had Iran shooting rockets into Saudi Arabia. We had the whole border riots going on in Israel. We had conflict in Syria, right? We had the whole Kurdish abandonment in Syria that we dealt with. We had a raging war going on in the Donbass in southeast Ukraine, where Russia was still funding people to fight down there. They still owned Crimea. North Korea was still testing.
Wait, no. That was Obama.
Wait, no. The Donbass, the war.
Crimea was 2014. That was before Trump.
I'm aware, but Crimea was still occupied, and Russia was still fighting and funding fighters in the southeast of Ukraine all through Trump's term. That was still happening.
What Destiny's saying is Trump didn't get out, even though Biden actually got out of Afghanistan.
Trump ended one conflict, arguably, and that was by surrendering to the Taliban.
Do you think the Russia-Ukraine thing would be going on, and the Israel deal would be going on if Trump was in office? I mean, this is one of his talking points. So
yeah, of course it would be. Yeah, of course.
So you don't believe Trump's telling the truth? If he gets elected, it'll be done before he gets in office.
I mean, Trump has literally said that he would just tell the Ukrainians to give up to Russia. And what's Trump going to do in Palestine? Like, what would he even do?
Yeah.
I'm a tax guy, so not my nothing.
Yeah.
I have a right to be literally. I just don't know enough.
Tom, someone asked in the chat. They said, "Are you less concerned about Trump getting in, essentially because the Senate's most likely going to go GOP? Like that's a check and balance. So you could make the argument that even if Harris wins the presidency,
I thought that in 2020, and I made a mistake.
Okay.
I didn't think that. I didn't know. Nobody thought the Democrats could sweep in 2020, and they did.
Yeah.
So do I think the Democrats can't sweep in 2024? No, I don't think that for a second.
If you had to give Kamala Harris a tips or not, maybe tip is a bad word because no tax
recommendation,
like recommendations. Is there anything like, what do you like about what she's talking about? What would you like? Should she be going on to Rogan? She
should just be making more personal attacks on Donald Trump. The Republicans have divorced themselves from reality. They don't talk policy anymore. Donald Trump is incredibly fragile. She should just say he has small hands and go from there. Tell her that Stormy Daniels, sent her a picture of his dick. It was small. Unironically, it should just be brutal personal attacks on Trump.
Really?
Yes, because the Republicans have abandoned all policy. It's a joke now. Like we don't talk policy in the U.S. anymore because the Republicans have decided that they don't want to talk policy. Like especially for you guys doing like finance and econ, I don't know how you could stomach listening to Donald Trump talk at that Bloomberg meeting. Like my God, I didn't know that. Like the question would be like your child comes home and they get an F on their math test. What's your goal? And it's like, well, I'm going to increase tariffs on Saudi Arabia. Like, wait, what? Like it was an unbelievable conversation. And then people will say like Kamala stutters or doesn't speak well. And like, meanwhile, Donald Trump is just saying insane stuff constantly. And he's non-responsive to everything. I don't know. It's crazy to me.
I think, and I think you believe that Trump is going to get in and be the boss man. No one will be able to stand up to him. I don't necessarily see it that same way. And so it's not like, I don't love Donald Trump's personality, period. I don't think you could look to him and say, this is an amazing leader. This is what you want your kids to be like. Like, I think you can be critical there, but then you can also say like, hey, the people behind him and the policies behind him. And obviously we can agree to disagree on those things, but like, I just want to be real that there are some people that love Donald Trump's personality. I don't think anyone on this call would get in line and be like, wow, we love that. But I mean, I feel like this conversation has been really great. Tom,
I agree on the personality thing, but like the problem is that if you like, I don't know if I believe that. I think people do like his personality because let's say that you cared. Like if I were to put myself, I grew up as a Republican. My mom is Cuban. Okay, I grew up very Republican. All right, I cried when they sent Elian back to Cuba. All right, okay. If I was a Republican and I hated deficits, I'm looking at this guy Donald Trump. This guy came in as a businessman. Okay, he should be able to run a tight ship. The markets, you guys are investors, right? When Trump was here, what was it like 25% year over year for the first 3 years? It was insane. Why is he pressuring interest rates to remain so low? Why is he spending so much money if things like balancing the budget and everything are important? Like, this is just not the guy for budgets. It's not the guy for fiscal responsibility. And the fact that he says he wants to bring in somebody now to try to like cut government spending. Like, why didn't you do it when you were the leader, when the economy was going amazingly, right? When everybody was happy, when people were posting huge huge returns for the markets. I just don't see him coming in now when you've got like all this cumulative inflation and everything, right? The prices aren't going down. We're not deflating. That's never happening. So, and then, we say like, we don't like price controls, but they want to keep the $35 insulin. So I don't know, like, even if I was a fiscal conservative, Trump would not be the guy to get any of this done. I just don't see it ever happening.
Well, I would agree. We do not have a fiscal conservative running for president right now. Period. We don't. We do not have a fiscal conservative running for president. We have 2 fiscal liberals running for president. I think that's absolutely true. Would I prefer fiscal conservative? Absolutely, 100%. That said, I prefer if you're going to you're going to have a tax system, you're going to have an income tax system, and you're going to have incentives. That is part of the fabric of our country. Frankly, not just ours, every developed country has tax incentives. That is, no politician's ever going to give up that power, which is the power to tax, right? They're not going to do that. That's why we're never going to get a flat tax, for example. We would never get that because that would give up the power to tax. That's why we don't get a value-added tax. You lose all the power you have. If you're going to have the income tax, I still like, if you're going to incentivize, there does need to be a balance. You've got it. To me, the tax incentives, taxes should be, if they're going to incentivize, should incentivize things that improve the economy, improve the welfare long-term, not short-term, and don't put a drag on the economy. And the tax law is fundamentally, 6,000 to 7,000 pages. It's mostly, they're mostly incentives. Okay, that's what the tax law really is. And so then you basically choose your incentives. And all presidents use incentives. And the question is, what kind of incentives are we going to get out of Harris versus what kind of incentives are we going to get out of Trump? Interestingly enough, Harris likes the 2017 Tax Act if you make less than $400,000. She wants to maintain it.
And Tom, you've shared a couple times tonight on some things that you've liked about Kamala Harris's, credits and on new building. Destiny, is there anything that Trump did in his time with the economy and tax-wise that you would give him his flowers or said that he did a good job on?
The problem is that even if there are things that I might have liked, they just happen incidentally because I don't think that Trump has a view of the economy, that's greater than how a 6-year-old would envision things. I don't think Trump. I don't think. If you were to hold a gun to Trump's head and you were to ask him to explain the difference between the budget deficit and the national debt and a trade deficit, he wouldn't be able to explain those three things.
To be fair, though, Kamala would be in that same boat.
I absolutely disagree. Kamala is a million times more qualified. She's already won.
You think?
Several.
I just don't know if I would use that argument at all. I think both of them.
To be clear, it's not even questionable. Kamala is smarter than Donald Trump in almost every conceivable way related to government. She's been DA of San Francisco. She was Attorney General for California for 2 terms, and she was the Vice President for 4 terms in an administration that actually did stuff. Donald Trump was in office. He was a historic failure when it came to legislation. He ran on repeal and replace the ACA. He couldn't get it done. He got the tax cuts done. He did first step, which was okay. He was a miserable failure at the border. He ruled through executive action. He left the country in a horrible state, wrestling with COVID. There were BLM riots that raged on for a year. He couldn't get a handle on any of the civil situations. The lockdowns were historically unpopular. He couldn't organize any of the states or get the governors behind anything. He threatened to withhold FEMA aid from California because it would Trump was just he was a horrible leader in every conceivable way. So it's hard to give him credit for everything. The only people that he even likes that he gives credits to, he's oh, well, Viktor Orban said nice things about me. I want people like Kim Jong-un. Putin is really nice to be damn, come on, man. What about Trudeau?
So
what about the people that are right next to us? What about, I don't know.
Yeah. So should Kamala have gone on Joe Rogan? Could she, because a lot of people are saying that she couldn't last. And why is she avoiding, do you wish she was out? You stream every day, it seems for you're out there. Why do you think they're not putting her out in front of a lot of media?
Didn't Donald Trump, hold on, just 2 questions. 1, Donald Trump dodged a second debate with Kamala, right?
Correct.
And then 2, Kamala did an interview on Fox News, right?
Correct.
So it doesn't compute to me that Donald Trump gets the standard of he's a brave guy because he goes on Joe Rogan. The Joe Rogan interview was such a glaze fest. He did that interview when I was in Texas, and I couldn't even watch it online because Texas has banned pornography, okay, from mobile phones. I couldn't even watch the interview. That's how much of a glaze fest the Joe Rogan Donald Trump interview. So the idea that because she didn't do Joe Rogan, that she's not being serious about, I don't know. I don't buy that. I just don't buy that.
Okay. Well, there's so many good things. Who's going to win on Tuesday? Predictions, and then we can wrap this thing up. Destiny, do you feel like Kamala's going to win?
I feel Kamala's going to win, but it's 55-45. It's almost a coin flip. I mean, who knows? I honestly,
you think it's going to come down to Pennsylvania?
It could be a blowout either way. It could be a not Reagan tier, but it could be a huge landslide for either side. Who knows?
Tom, any predictions?
I actually would predict that one of the parties is going to sweep. I don't think we're going to have a mixed Senate and Congress.
Yeah. Okay. Destiny, thank you. I really appreciate you taking time.
Thanks, Destiny.
Yeah. And can I say also, I disagree with you so much, but I enjoyed getting to talk. It's fun to talk. I don't know how much you debate taxes or whatever, but talking to somebody who knows what a 1031 exchange is, or talking to somebody who knows what like a marginal tax rate is. It's nice to be able to actually go through some of this stuff sometimes, because Jesus, most tax stuff is absurdly stupid when talking to people. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And ironically, Destiny, if you need a good person to help you with your tax strategy, you're talking to one of the best in the world. So Tom, thank you for being here. I know that you don't necessarily do conversations like this all the time.
You know what? I love it. So I lived in France for a couple of years when I was younger.
Yeah,
and
people were saying that you were obsessed with France in the comments.
What I love about the French is they love a good argument, because that's how you learn. And that's why I like a debate like this with Destiny, because I learned new things tonight. And I want to learn. I think you raise the consciousness of the world when you have people debating legitimately debating different views. I think it's awesome. So thank you, Caleb, for hosting it.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, thank you guys both. Have an amazing night, and I'm sure this won't be the last time our paths cross. So take care, guys.
Thanks very much.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Yep.